Hi, everyone. Good to see you on the webinar again. So I'm Riccardo, I'm the secretary for the BECTU branch, and I've been watching these webinars and been on a couple myself, so it's nice to be back again for the evening. As Nia said, we've got Eleanor, who's also a member of the committee for the coming year, and we've got Zack, who I'm guessing a lot of people on the panel will know, Zack Arnold, who is, I'm going to give a quick bio now, but I'm guessing people know who you are, Zack, so we'll keep it short. Zack is an award-winning Hollywood film and TV editor on shows such as Cobra Kai, Empire, Burn Notice, Underground, and also Glee as well. A documentary director for a film called Go Father, the Christopher Rush story, father of two, and the creator of the Optimize Yourself program and the podcast that accompanies it. In the Optimizer coaching program, then Zack is helping creative professionals and entrepreneurs do better and be better by teaching them how to more effectively manage their time, their energy, and their creativity, so they can produce high quality work in less time and become productivity ninjas. And he's also helping them achieve all of that whilst prioritizing the most important people, things, and passions in their life, or without sacrificing their health or their sanity in the process, which is one of the big things we're going to be talking about on the webinar tonight, because it's been a big issue in this industry for God knows how long, and it's still an issue, and it's going to keep being an issue. So maybe this pandemic is a chance to shake it up a bit and change some things around. That's what we're going to talk about. Let's find out. Zack's mission is to inspire people to step outside their comfort zones and to take back their health so they feel empowered to reach their fullest potential. In his free time, he's racing Tough Mudders and Spartan races in the States. And for the past 2.5 years, has been training for the TV show American Ninja Warrior with Tony Horton, who is the guy who created the P90X program, which any health fanatics out there will definitely know about. Tony is Zack's trainer for the American Ninja Warrior. And alongside that, he's been speaking at numerous events across the country and conventions about optimizing creativity and work life, not just with post. I mean, that's your focus, right? But you're talking with people who are trying to do this across all forms of work and all forms of the industry. So you've been featured in publications such as Forbes, The Huffington Post, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, and you've been a guest on other podcasts as well alongside this webinar. So that's a quick background on who Zack is and what he's doing. Full disclosure, just so that everyone knows as well, I took a little sabbatical after I finished mission, and at the end of that period of time, that's how Zack and I met, because I got in touch with him about actually doing that Optimizing Yourself program. So I've been through it, so we can talk about that too, and I can give a little inside kind of perspective on what it's like and what it's challenged me to do, and how I'm trying to use that to help my career as I transition from, or attempt, I should say, to transition from assisting to editing, which is a long time path, but something we all probably want to do here on the course. Zack, let's start it off with what happened to you to make you create the Optimize Yourself program. You've touched on it on your podcast with your interviews, but give a little background here as to why you wanted to do it.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I appreciate the invite to be here. I know this has been a long time conversation that we've had via Slack for a while to make this happen, so I appreciate it. Secondly, before I tell my story, I have to go into coach mode immediately. Yes. I can't let you get away with saying you're making the attempt. You can't do that, because the way that we use these words in our head and we create these scripts, you're creating a barrier for yourself, my friend.
That's true.
Dude, you worked on Mission Impossible Fallout. If you want to make the transition to editing television, you're going to make the transition. So erase the word attempt out of your vocabulary. And when you introduce yourself, you say, I am currently making the transition to editing television. So I'm just going to throw that out there right now. And I'll come out of coach mode, so don't worry. But
that's good. I like it. We can start again if you want.
No, that's okay. That's no worries. We're doing this live, so that's cool. But yeah, to kind of describe how I ended up here, if it's a matter of telling the story of why I decided to talk about burnout and creative performance and talking about my story, it's really a question of, well, which story of depression and burnout and crashing do you want to hear? Because there are so many. Really, the first one started way back early in my career. I'm going to date myself, but I've been doing this for about 20 years now. And about 3 years into my career, I was editing my first independent feature film. And it was a really intense project. I was getting paid very, very little money. I was essentially a glorified assistant, where I was my own assistant editor, but I was also cutting it. And there was a period of time during the director's cut where we had worked, I believe, I don't know, maybe 2 to 3 months straight, 7-day weeks, 16 hours a day. So the pattern was wake up at 9 in the morning, knock on my door, director comes in. I was doing this from home. So I've been doing the work from home thing for a long time. And we would work until about 1 a.m. She would go home, 8 hours later, knock on the door, and it was just that 7 days a week for about 3 months straight. And it literally almost killed me. As soon as we delivered our cut to, it wasn't to the studio because it was an indie film, but we delivered it to multiple studios to get distribution. And I just massively crashed. Like, I could not even function. I was sleeping 12 to 16 hours a day. And I vividly remember spending pretty much all my waking hours just laying on the couch watching reruns of Law and Order SVU. That was my entire life during that hiatus. And at one point, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, had just started living together, and she had said to me, "Do you mind taking out the trash and then cleaning up the dishes or whatever it was?" And I just broke down and cried because it was too much. I was so overwhelmed, and my nervous system was so destroyed I couldn't do simple tasks. And I realized that this was not a sustainable way for me to live. Because as I was young in my career in college and when I first came out to Los Angeles, I was a machine. I could work 20 hours a day, and I prided myself on, I can sleep in the edit bay tonight. And I thought that I was invincible, and I realized if I'm going to do this for the next 40 to 50 years of my life, there's got to be a better way. So I spent years from that point experimenting with all the things that I learned personally in the world of athletic performance, because I used to be in martial arts for years. I did other sports, and just I had a hobby at the time of behavioral psychology and mindset, which has now become obviously not only an obsession but now an actual livelihood. But I started to combine that with creative performance, and I thought, is there a way that I can use what I know about sports and athletics and mindset and apply it to being creative? Because what I had been taught by the industry was that you sit in front of your computer, you are an extension of your workstation, and you just punch the keyboard all day long and all night long. And I thought, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's detrimental to my creativity. That's not improving it. And working 80 hours a week doesn't mean that I'm doing better work than I would be in just 45. So I spent years experimenting, most of it really, really massive failures of experimentation. But then it started to click and it started to work. And around the time that I got my job on Burn Notice, I had my first kid. And just as I started to figure all this out, massive crashes once again. Dealing with lack of sleep, having my first child, then I had my second child a couple of years later. And I remember driving to Burn Notice one day. And for anybody that's been to LA, you know that when you're driving in traffic, you're not really driving in traffic, you're more crawling. But I found myself, I had actually fallen asleep one morning while I was driving to work. And it's not dangerous because, I mean, there was like, instead of having 5 feet between me and the next car, there's 25 feet. Somebody honks, so it's not like I was like driving 70 miles an hour or kilometers, because I realize I'm talking to many of you over the pond.
Yeah, that's the truth.
But that was kind of the wake-up call. I'm like, no, this happened to me, 7-8 years ago. It's happening to me again. I really have to figure this out this time. And I started to dive super deep into health and wellness and learning about how do I improve sleep, and how do I improve finding ways to exercise and have more energy during the day. And I really experimented with different ways to organize my workstation such that I wasn't sitting all day long. And it all really started to click and come together this time. And then people started to ask me, what are you doing? Because you have 2 kids, you're working on these high-profile shows, but you seem to be in pretty good shape, you seem to have a lot of energy, and you never stay late at night. So what are you doing differently than all of us? And I thought, oh, well, it might be helpful if I were to share with people what some of the strategies are that I'm doing. And this really all started with a hiking group. So I banded together with a bunch of editors that I knew on the show I was cutting at the time, with a show I was cutting at the time with a few other friends. And we just started to go out on Sundays and we would go hiking. And the joke that I would make in the emails I would send is I would send a link on Wikipedia to the sun. Like, here's a link of what the sun looks like. For any of you that aren't aware, this is what you're going to be confronted with when we go outside on Sundays. Editor's joke. And I decided to call it Fitness in Post, because it's a bunch of post-production people that want to get fit. And that idea just kind of took off. And I started a blog and I started a podcast. And at the time, it was just our group talking about what we were learning and what we were going through. And it kind of took on a life of its own and really became a thing. And once I realized that it was a thing, I wanted it to be about a lot more than just health and fitness. So that's when it eventually transitioned to Optimize Yourself, which it is now. So It's not just covering fitness, because frankly, most of the editors that would come to me would say, I love the stuff you're talking about, but the word fitness scares me. So I thought, well, maybe that's not the best branding. And then I had other people that weren't in post, that were in other creative industries or other areas of entertainment that weren't post. And they would say, I don't get it. What's post? I'm really interested in fitness, but I don't know what post means. So that's where the rebrand and the transition came from. So now it's a matter of helping people either to optimize their health, their productivity, or their career through various tips, strategies, and mindsets.
Great, thank you for that. That's a really, really thorough thing. One thing that jumped out at me and what you were saying there was the period in which you were almost like using yourself as a human guinea pig to work out how to do all this stuff, to cheat it, if you will, and become an optimized version of you. You were doing this in and around being a father, working. You were, that's a lot of time. There's a lot of research. I'm just interested to know, actually, because it's not something we've talked about ourselves. How were you doing that alongside the job, and what sort of support were you getting from your family when you were doing this? I mean, I know for certain when I come home that often when I'm tired, I've got to cook, or I want to just sit down in front of the couch and just watch something on Netflix to chill and kind of cool the mind down because you've had a very busy, exhausting day. Were you just never doing that? Were you always coming home and doing another hour or two of kind of research and splitting parent shifts with your partner? How did it work?
I mean, it all starts with small baby steps, and then it starts to, the analogy that I use in my program a lot, that I'm sure I've used with you as well, is that everybody's trying to push this giant boulder up a hill. They're trying to do all this really, really hard stuff. And my philosophy is that you create a tiny, tiny little snowball, you put it at the top of the hill, and you push it down, and it's going to get bigger and grow, and it's going to become an avalanche, right? So for me, it wasn't about how do I do all these things at once? How do I learn about health and sleep and productivity, and how do I train to be an American Ninja Warrior, and how do I edit it, and how do I be a better father? I just picked one thing. So I would spend months just learning, how can I get better sleep? Or how can I exercise more? Or let's learn about nutrition. I've kind of alluded to this a little bit, but most people have hobbies. I don't have hobbies. I have obsessions. So I would just decide, what is my obsession at this period of time? What do I think the one thing is that if I were to work on this next is going to have the greatest impact going forwards? So it would be months at a time just diving into one subject. And as far as how I would split the time up, the one benefit of working in Los Angeles is you spend a lot of time in your car. So I spent years using my commute as my informal education. So I would create these playlists of podcasts, and it wasn't just a matter of, oh, I'm going to flip through my phone and find something to listen to today. I would put together a playlist like I was building my own curriculum. All right, let me find the top experts in sleep. And all week long, I'm going to listen to all these various experts talk about sleep, and I'm going to see what are the common themes or ideas that come together. How can I start to apply them? And it would just be one thing at a time. So it's this domino effect. So I would get a little bit more sleep. I'd feel a little bit better, have a little bit more energy. Then I would do more to get better sleep. Then once I had sleep figured out and I had a lot of energy, all right, well, now how can I start to eat better? Or how can I introduce more exercise into my life? And it just becomes that domino effect, or that snowball effect. And then eventually you get to the point where you're like, I've got all this energy and all this time left over, because one of the things that I was really obsessive about for years was time management and productivity, which is a huge portion of my course, especially now because so many people have had this newfound awareness because of the pandemic of how awful they are at managing their time, because they had a job and now all of a sudden they have all the time in the world and they're like, what am I supposed to do with all the time that I have, right? So productivity was a huge part of it. So as I started to become more productive, I was able to cut more in less time, which gave me more time to learn. So the snowball just kept rolling down the mountain. And then about the beginning of 2018, what had happened is that during 2017, it's the way that I talk about 2017 is I call it the lost year. Because I had been working really hard on building my first major launch of my first online course, which is called Move Yourself. It's a 4-week online course that shows you how to build a more dynamic workstation and the tools that you need to move more, be more creative, more dynamic. But I didn't listen to my own advice about work-life balance, and I was working really hard, intense hours to launch this program, and I burned out for months. And all the things that I put into practice for all those years that were working so well completely fell apart. And I had about 6 months of massive burnout. All I did was go to work and come home, and that was it. There was no extracurriculars. There was no listening to podcasts. Even the podcast and the website and everything that I was doing just went on hold. I just disappeared. But then I realized, all right, well, let me just start over from the beginning where I started years ago and just hit the repeat button. And I woke up, I think, I don't even remember the exact day, but I know it was during holiday vacation. And I sat down with my wife in this very room and I said, I've got a crazy idea. And first of all, she looked at me and she's like, what now? Because I have a lot of crazy ideas.
Another
So
one,
it wasn't a big deal to her when I said that. And I said, you know what? I think I want to be an American Ninja Warrior. She's like, okay, yeah, I can see that. I'm like, that's it? Really? She's like, yeah, go for it. I'm like, well, that was easy enough. So that was where the journey restarted. And at that point, I really focused on, if I'm going to be teaching this stuff, then I have to be living by this stuff. And I can't be putting in 80-hour weeks launching a program that's talking about work-life balance. So that's really what has kind of led me to where I am the last couple of years. But the more productive you become, the more you sleep, the better you eat, the better that you move, the easier it becomes to find the time to be able to learn this stuff. So it's really kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, but you just got to start with one small thing and not try to do all of it at once.
Right. And so an interesting thing for me, though, is listening to you talk there, although you started kind of linearly in terms of what you were teaching yourself, first about sleep, then about diet. Once we as individuals, once you have started those balls rolling on those different topics, though, it becomes something where they do need to move in parallel, right? You can't just focus on sleep, but then eat crap, but be sleeping well, because the scales, the balance is going to kind of get upset, right? It's about, once you've got your balls moving, you've got to have a system in place. I'm not saying you need to be multitasking crazy to not be able to work efficiently, but you need to be keeping your healthy eating going whilst getting the right amount of sleep, whilst editing efficiently. They need to move together, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, one of the catchphrases and really the fundamental core idea of the program is, I believe that we can be successful in this industry because we prioritize our health and our well-being, not despite the fact that we prioritize time to focus on these. Because it feels like the conversations and just the work culture that we live in general. And what I've learned so much over the last few years, because I'm doing all this digitally, I work with people all over the world. This isn't about me working with creative professionals in Los Angeles. I mean, you and I have worked together for months, and I have people that are in Denmark and Ireland and South Africa and Colombia. Like, they're all over the place. It's the exact same problem everywhere, where it's mutually exclusive. Either I'm putting everything that I have into the job, or when hiatus comes, then I'm going to focus on my health. And that doesn't work. So what I'm trying to do is teach people how you can I don't want to say you can do it all, because I think that's a little bit pie in the sky. I'm not saying any of this is easy, but I think that you have to find a way to prioritize doing all of it as much as you can to your own ability at the same time, and getting out of this mindset of, well, I'm in work mode right now, I'm just going to go in tunnel vision, I'm going to get the job done. But then as soon as hiatus comes, yep, I'm going to get healthy now, because we all know when hiatus comes, we crash. And then we're thinking, well, okay, I just need to recover. As soon as the next job starts, then I'm going to get healthy. And it's just this vicious cycle.
Which was the approach that I was trying to take for quite a number of years. Like, when I'm on the job, I'm on the job, and I'm on the film, and I'm all about the film, and then I'll take a break and I'll try and recover. And yeah, it didn't work very well.
Your body doesn't care that you're on the job.
Right. And that leads into a question that I wanted to ask, just from my own experience being primarily film, and I'm sure we've got people in TV and film on the webinar. You know, what you've been doing here to optimize yourself in this way. The first part of the question is this a conscious choice to primarily work in television to enable you to do this more effectively, because maybe the hours are better, or the partnerships you find are better? You know, I think that would be something interesting for people to hear when they're trying to work out career paths, because I certainly found in film that being an assistant, and as you rise up the ranks to a first, you know, the expectations are extremely high, and as an editor even more so. And film has this, we're making a film thing to it, you know, like why does this deserve to exist? And then there's just this aura around it, that, not to denigrate TV, because I think TV's in a golden age and has been for the last 20 years as we've, you know, moved into the HBO world and all the stuff that's going on at the moment with the streamers. But is there a difference, and do you think that plays a part in how effectively you can control your lifestyle in this way in terms of your health and your work-life balance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, TV is a huge part of this whole process, and I'll break down why that is. And I'm going to step outside of myself for a little bit and go back to this idea of the work culture that we all live in. When I say Hollywood, I mean the Hollywood industry, not the city of Hollywood or Los Angeles. Like Hollywood worldwide, the entertainment industry. Like in my mind, you work in Hollywood, right? You're working in like this the
We're in the
high end
London
entertainment.
branch.
Yeah, exactly. You're the London branch of Hollywood, right? So the idea is that we all are here because we want to be successful. The problem is nobody really helps us define what success means to us. And for most people, they just jump into the industry because they love the craft. And success means that when I go to parties or mixers, when people ask me what I'm working on, we want them to say, "Oh my God, that's so cool. I love that." And if we don't get that response, if we're working on a reality show or a documentary or whatever it is, and people say, "Oh, I've never heard of that," we're like, "Oh, well, if they haven't heard of it and they're not impressed by my work, well, then I must not be successful yet." But nobody helps us define what it means to be successful to us individually.
Right.
And I was on the same treadmill for a long time as well, where in my mind, since I was about 13 years old, the end of the tunnel was me standing on the stage holding my Oscar for my big feature film. I
Right.
think we've all had that image more than once. And I realized, well, this really doesn't align with the things that are the most important to me in my life anymore. And where that moment happened for me was when I was editing season 1 of Empire. And I don't know if Empire ended up being a thing at all over there in the UK, but in the US, the first season of it was a huge cultural phenomenon. It broke decades worth of ratings records. It just totally came out of nowhere. Where in the world of streaming, when the networks were getting pummeled, it was really the first piece of appointment television in a long, long time. And I was editing the season finale at the moment. And I knew based on statistics that give or take in a couple of weeks, what I was editing in my small, tiny, dark room was going to be seen by about 25 million people. That's what I've been working for years and years and years. Like tens of millions of people are going to see my edits, right? That's success. And maybe I'll even win an Emmy, and that's even more success. But at the same time, I was putting my children to bed via FaceTime every single night, and I spent 3 hours a day in the car, and I was miserable and I was exhausted. And there was one specific night where I was putting my son to bed via FaceTime. He was about 5 years old at the time. And we had done our usual thing, and my wife thought that she had hung up the phone, and she hadn't. And my son just kind of leaned over to her and said, "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy want to put us to bed at night? Why doesn't he love us?" That was it. I'm out. This is not what I want. This is not what I signed up for.
Right.
And I realized that what I was not prioritizing was my lifestyle needs. Right. So in the program, I talk about these two areas that you have to really think about. What are my creative needs? What stories fulfill me? What themes fulfill me? What kind of people do I want to collaborate with? And what are my lifestyle needs? And I was not meeting my lifestyle needs because all I was focusing on was the creative part. So at that moment, I started to ask myself very different questions about how I wanted to approach my career. And I said that I need to work on projects such that I am putting my kids to bed in person more often than I am not. It's not realistic to do it every single night, but it had to be more than 51% of the time I could put my kids to bed in person. And when I looked at the options that were available to me, I could have continued down the high-end network path, working on really big television shows. I've always wanted to pursue larger feature films, and in the beginning of my career, I was doing indie features and like studio independents, like the Fox Searchlight level. And I realized that if I were to go back down that path, let's say that I wanted to pursue the Mission Impossible films, right? Let's say that Eddie had called me up and said, "Hey, you want to jump on the film with me and help cut it?" There's a part of me that would have been like, "Oh my God, are you kidding? That would be amazing." And I actually had an opportunity similar to that at movies at about that level to be a second editor on something like that. And I realized that I was going to have to essentially miss a year of my children's lives. I said that's no longer an option for me. So I need to pursue projects that are both creatively fulfilling that I enjoy, but that meet my lifestyle needs. And for the most part, that is in television. So television is a very, very conscious choice for me because, as I'm sure you can attest to much more than I, when you're on a feature film, especially a big one, it's essentially your life. There isn't a whole lot of room for weekends on your own and evenings on your own. And that's not a lifestyle that I think is worth what I would get in return anymore. So it's a very, very conscious choice. But in TV, it can get crazy too. So I've made a very, very concerted effort to make sure that when I get on a show or when I'm interviewing for a show, that I interview the showrunners, because I want to understand their expectations, how they collaborate, how often they're going to need me available to them. And I
Right.
passed on good shows, big shows, because I knew the show would be all consuming, and that's no longer a good fit for me.
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing for people to hear as well, about that. Eleanor, jump in. You wanted to say something?
Um, yeah, I think one thing that was great about your program was it really, in terms of like thinking about prioritizing things, is I think a lot of people who are like me, new coming into the industry, we see the industry as sometimes just one thing, or like the really high up feature films or the really high end television. And what was great is there's actually so many different kinds of film, kinds of TV, and there's so many things that you can choose from. You can choose something that actually fits to your lifestyle, and I found your program really, really helpful, and so many people have, especially newcomers, because it allowed us to think about ourselves. Because sometimes you would just, like, especially new coming in, you would just prioritize the film and you won't really think about your own lifestyle needs as
Right.
well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important, and one of the interesting things, and I'm sorry I didn't do this in the intro, Eleanor, one of the interesting things I wanted to say, and the reason that we're both on this call, is because I thought it would be really interesting to have the insight of, I'm 35 and I started in the industry in 2009. So that was in a TV job, and then I transitioned to film in 2010 with X-Men being my first film. And, stuff existed to help with this, but nothing like fitness in post or optimize yourself existed. And I was focused, perhaps a little too focused, on tunnel visioning into the film industry however I could. And a lot of the stuff that I was listening to and finding on my own time, podcasts, interviews and stuff, was from, people who at that time were the top writers and top editors and directors doing interviews and stuff. But the overriding message that was being given to me as a young 25-year-old by the people in the industry at that time was, pay your dues. This is how you get in. Like, become a good assistant, work your way up as an assistant, and then you can hopefully progress to the role of the HOD. And then you're creatively maybe stimulating yourself and doing what you want to be doing. But again, because the focus for me was film, I was listening to a lot of people talking in film, and subconsciously, the message I was getting, and consciously, was, if you're working in film, that's what your life will be. Like, essentially everything else about your life will be put to the side and must wait till after you have finished the film. And then you've probably been paid well enough if it's a good film. Even a trainee, certainly nowadays, is getting paid a rate that is above the average of most people in this country on a weekly basis. So even on a low rate, maybe in London, obviously it's a bit different because you have to have higher living expenses. But if you're sensible with money, you can still put stuff away so that you could probably have some kind of break between jobs and have a life, so to speak. But I wasn't hearing contrary information to this from anyone I was listening to. And so that's what I did. And, I don't mind admitting, as I have done before, like, I got to the end of mission. And as much as I love the job and I love working with Eddie and everything, I burned myself out. That's why I came to you, Zach. That's why we talked about this, and we were working out, okay, how do we sidestep and move forward and try and work out a system to kind of do the same thing as lots of people have. And, you've touched on it in a number of podcasts, right? When you talked to, is it Roger Barton, the gentleman?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he was very honest as well and frank about, his story from editing on your, he talked about it openly on your podcast. I think loved what he was doing, loved his job, but had gone through a very difficult time with his partner as well. And just the demands of those films. And I think it was the Transformers ones that he was primarily working on, which with Michael Bay, obviously, like, great action films, pushing the visual effects industry forward amazingly as well, but very demanding, and just one of many people with the story of divorce. And so I wonder, what would my path, what choices would I have made if something like your program had been around 10 years ago? And Eleanor, you're saying that, this is really helping to get people to just think a little bit more. What internal validation do I want? It's not, because for me, I'll say it was an external validation. I loved editing, I love technology, I love film, I love storytelling, but the glitz of film certainly was a pull and an appeal to me that I think is going to be the case for a lot of people. But 10 years later, I was burnt out. And if there's a good message for young people here, think about that and think about what you really want. You can handle it at 25. 10 years later, it's a different story.
Well, I mean, look at all the glitz and glamour that you're living right now. Like the small windowless room, the artificial lighting, the cables everywhere. Like, does it get any better? I mean, come on. Like, it's amazing.
This is a
right?
virtual background, Zach. I'm actually.
Oh, is it? You're actually on the beach, and you chose this as your virtual background.
Yeah.
I see.
I wanted to appeal to the crowd of
I totally
people
understand.
that,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I went through the exact same thing that you did, where I realized there's a resource that I really, really need right now, and it's not out there. The resources were available for the athletes. And I thought, well, I'm not an athlete, right? I'm not a biohacker. I don't need to learn how to run my next triathlon, but I want to take the stuff that you've learned and I want to apply it to my life. But like you said, I'm not, it's not that I was a human guinea pig. I'm still a human guinea pig, right? But I realized that this is a resource that can be helpful for other people. And I really, really wish I just had it and I could go to a URL and I could solve these problems. But as I've done more than once in the past, I kind of had this realization where I'm like, crap, I'm going to have to be the one that needs to build it because this needs to be built and we need this. And that's essentially what I've taken upon myself for years now, is to make this resource available because I needed it more than anybody did. I think that one of the things that happens when you start to do a podcast and a program like this is people assume you've got it all figured out. I'm as far from having it all figured out as anybody else. I'm still trying to figure this stuff out every single day. And one of the things that we haven't talked about yet that I think is really important, specifically when it comes to this idea of hyper-focus and diving into the job and poor time management, one of the exacerbating circumstances that led me to where I am today is that in my mid-20s, when I went through this huge bout of depression and burnout, I was also diagnosed with adult onset ADD. When I was a kid growing up, I got all my homework done, I met all of my appointments, all my expectations, and I realized that was just because my dad was Mr. Discipline and I had no other choice. Once I was left to my own devices and I was no longer in college, and it was just me making my own decisions and setting my own goals and deadlines, I was a dumpster fire. I couldn't get anything done, and I didn't understand why. I didn't understand why I would be in tears when my wife said, "Can you take out the trash and do the dishes?" But I can't prioritize which one to do first, and I don't have the energy. That was driven by ADD, and one of the number one symptoms of ADD is the ability to hyperfocus. So if you learn how to harness it properly, it can be a superpower, but if you let it take over, it becomes kryptonite. And for me, it was kryptonite. So one of the reasons that I've become so good at time management and prioritization is a survival mechanism. Yes. So it's really important for people to understand that I built this program because I need it, not because I have all the answers and I wanted to just share all these tips and tricks. Like, I needed to build a program for me first. What works, what doesn't. Now let me bring a few people in, test it for them because they have the same issues that I do. And now it's just a matter of expanding and scaling to help more people with the same issues. But I'm far from having all this figured out. Trust me. Ask my wife. She'll tell you, I do not have all of this figured out. So I'm still trying to be the human guinea pig every single day myself. I just maybe happen to be, a step or two ahead just because I'm so massively obsessed with learning more about this stuff. And the more you learn, the more steps you add onto it, and the better you feel, the more that you want to do it. So it's a fun process where I still remember the first morning that I was driving to work after I had started to learn how to hone my diet and my sleep. And I remember driving, I'm like, oh my God, I have ideas right now. Like, not only am I awake, but I'm thinking of stuff. And that's where I started to come up with the idea of the podcast and all the other things. I'm like, I didn't even know what it felt like. It was like being in somebody else's body. But I've been building off of that feeling for years and years and years. But I just want to make it very, very clear that I'm not coming to this saying I figured all of it out and I have the answers. I'm still the guinea pig and still trying to figure it out myself, and now with my community every single day.
So we've hit about 35 minutes there just talking on those issues. I want to link this in now to the articles that you wrote, because obviously, the last 5 to 10 years have been certainly a big cause for you with the Fitness and Post and Optimize Yourself and developing that. And you've built this community, and kind of ironically, not in a structured way with the course and everything, but in a parallel, similar things have been happening over here in the UK with the union and coming together and forming the Rough Assembly, and a bunch of people back in 2014 in the Sun Tavern, just basically all coming together, to talk to the union rep at the time and say, what can we do? How do we do it? And why are we all allowing this treatment to happen to us in post? You know, and we've built a community over here as well. And there is now a similar kind of presence in the UK with the Facebook groups and the communities and people talking to each other, and our rate cards, and just back to Post Fest that we've put on, and it's a similar kind of vibe. So I think it's really interesting that in the same decade, this is now, you know, it's almost like this decade of change that's taking place on so many issues with the Me Too. That is a parallel of this. This is part of this. Do you see it as a generational thing as well? Are you seeing that there's a difference in outlook and mindset from younger people coming into the industry and wanting to live differently and work differently to the older generations who, admittedly at the moment, are in positions of power within the film industry, controlling budgets, controlling shows, you know, controlling whether we get hired or not? But are you seeing a difference? Are you seeing pushback in America?
Yeah,
I'm seeing it over here.
I would say that for the most part, the idea of working less hours, prioritizing our health and our well-being is well received across all generations and age levels. However, I see it much more prevalent in the younger generations because they haven't been indoctrinated or conditioned to believe that you have to sacrifice yourself for your work. When it comes to the articles that I wrote recently, one of them, this idea of we don't want to go back to normal because normal wasn't working. Vast majority of the response to that was very positive. People saying, yeah, I agree with you, and here's what wasn't working for me. But then in the follow-up article, I talked about this idea of what it would take for Hollywood, and again, the proverbial Hollywood, to adopt the idea of a 45-hour work week. And first of all, the people in Europe were like, we already work 40 and 45 hours. That's how they're called French hours for a reason. Yeah. But then I got not a lot. Yeah, not in England, right? You don't get French hours, even though you guys are a lot closer than we are. But I got a lot of pushback, especially from people that were in the larger IATSE union, people that are in the Teamsters, and people that are on set. And a lot of it was the older guard, like you said, the more seasoned professionals. And that mindset is, well, you suck it up, you pay your dues, you do what you're told. And the biggest one is you knew what you signed up for. You want to go work 40 hours a week, find another industry. There are millions of jobs for you. And so that I'm sure that you've heard a lot of those same things as well, but that's no longer sustainable. Things were a lot different before we transitioned to digital. And yeah, the hours were still very, very long. And I've done multiple podcasts with industry legends, one of them being Walter Murch, for example, where I asked him the question, you've been doing this for over 4 decades. What's changed as far as your hours, the deliverables, the demands? He's like, nothing. I mean, the only thing that's changed is we can get more work done in any given day because of technology, but I don't work any harder than I used to. We're just able to accomplish more faster, but it was still 6 and 7 day weeks and long days. Yeah. And he told a story, and I think it's part story, part urban legend, but he talked about there was a project at Universal, I believe it was back in the early to mid 70s, and they were in the midst of a really tight delivery deadline before the film was supposed to screen. And he didn't say what the movie was, but we're talking big tentpole movie. And they went to the post-production executive and said, we have to do something about the demands and the hours. People are dropping like flies. And the response was, then get more flies. That was the mentality decades ago, and it hasn't changed, but the difference is that because of technology, we are never disconnected from our jobs. We are working 24/7. Either we're literally working, or figuratively we're making ourselves available, and we're not setting boundaries, and that just wears us down to being shells of barely human beings by the time we're done with the project. And I think that what's happened is the pandemic is just this giant magnifying glass that's picking out all the imperfections and everything that doesn't work in society as a whole. I mean, we're seeing this come out in mass all over the globe, where all the things that we were just kind of barely getting by with, or that we were ignoring because we were all just too busy to pay attention to, now we have no choice but to pay attention to it. And one of them is everybody finally realizing with this new level of awareness, I don't want to do things anymore the way that I was doing them before. So multiple people in my program and hundreds of emails and social media messages that I've gotten where people have said, I was so busy driving to work and working so many hours that I didn't realize how little I was seeing my kids or how little I was sleeping. Now that I'm trapped at home, I'm getting to know my kids better than I have before. I'm sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night. And even though I'm not worked and I'm stressed out about not working, I'm becoming more of myself again, and I'm seeing all the things that I was missing, and that's terrifying to people. Because soon enough, they're going to have to go right back to where they were unless something changes.
Right, it normalized in the way that we didn't want it to be. It was bad. Then it went into the pandemic. Suddenly the blinkers get pulled off and people are going, oh, hang on, that was crazy what we were doing before.
Uh-huh.
What's to stop it just normalizing again, though? You know, humans, we're creatures of habit, we're creatures of change. A little bit of time passes, we get onto a few shows again. You know, can we do something different? Like you talk about it in the article, people have read on it. But for me, it's what's very interesting is that, to link it into what we did over here, you know, that one of the big discussions on this end has been about when we've done surveys and we've paneled people and asked them what they think. One of the big issues has always been, anyone, when you ask them, of course says, well, no, of course we don't want to work a 60+ hour week. You know, people still do it. And it's like, well, okay, what's keeping you doing it then? And often, I mean, people aren't always saying it, or anonymously they're okay with saying it. It's the salary, it's the money, it's the increased pay that we get working in this industry compared to, you know, doing something else in a shop. In fact, I've had someone challenge me when this was come out in that very argument, which was, well, you could be earning half of that working the same hours in a retail store, as if that justifies the hours we do in the film industry. And the interesting thing was when we paneled people and said, what would you know, most of them actually said, the majority said that they would rather keep working the long hours to get the extra money and the overtime than take a reduced weekly wage for less hours, which I thought was a really interesting insight into the kind of love-hate relationship we must all have with what we're doing in that sense, because it probably seems too overwhelming a thing that we can change. But how does a team of assistants, how do we come back from COVID and group together and change this? What are the little steps that we can all start to take that maybe we weren't taking before?
Well, the biggest thing on a systemic level or a fundamental level is this will only change if the following happens. The reason that there's really two basic reasons that I found that people are willing to work the long hours. One is because, like you said, they just secretly, or not so much secretly, they just want more money. So one of the pieces of feedback that I received, both very constructively and also very angrily in some of the Facebook comments that I've gotten, is I want my golden time. I want my overtime. I want my extra hours, right? That's why I'm in the film industry. I love my 90-hour weeks because of the paycheck. And what you find is largely that's coming from younger people that have not hit that wall where they realize that's not sustainable for decades. And then you see the older members, and this is where there's kind of this flip of the psychology of what we were just talking about, where a lot of older members have said, just wait until you're 50 and you have a family and tell me how you feel about getting all that golden time, right? But I think that the other fundamental reason that this is so hard to change is that, let's say that you were to go to your post supervisor or whomever it is that hires and fires you, and they said, we're going to need you to work a 60-hour week. And you say, well, no, I think I can get more done in 45. Oh, okay, well, I've got a stack of 100 resumes right here. I'll just replace you tomorrow. It's that fear that we have of, if we say no, we're going to be replaced. And I think the only way this fundamentally shifts is if enough people realize that this is not sustainable and it doesn't work, such that they don't have 100 people that they can replace you with because everybody says the same thing. If everyone collectively says, well, we're not going to work these kinds of hours because it's not productive and it's not conducive to being a human being, but it's also not conducive to doing my job well, then they no longer have that retort of, yeah, I'll replace you tomorrow with somebody that would be happy to work these hours and get the paycheck. But there's no way to really do it on an individual level until it's harder for them to get more flies, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So really what I have found is that, first of all, like we talked about a little bit earlier in the conversation, that you first have to know what you're getting yourself into on any individual project, which is why I'm so keen on interviewing and asking questions of the people that I'm going to work with about what does the lifestyle look like. This was something that I specifically talked about in a lengthy interview that I did, talking about how I landed the job on Cobra Kai, because that was a job where I just identified the show and I watched season 1 and I said, this is perfect for my creative needs. This fulfills all of my dreams and fantasies of working in Hollywood and being an editor. I mean, The Karate Kid was my Star Wars as a child. Like, how amazing would it be to work on Cobra Kai? But I didn't really know anybody, and I did a lot of research, and I have a whole process that I teach my students about how to virtually network with IMDb Pro and find connections. And I found one random connection, and I got myself in the door, and I convinced them that creatively I was the right fit, and they were really excited about it. But then I made it very clear to them that I needed to understand the lifestyle needs of the show. So I think part of it is we have to understand what we're getting ourselves into. And secondly, once we are on the show, I think there needs to be some communication amongst team members where you decide from day one that there's a certain type of culture you want to create on your show. This is a much different conversation in production, because in production, if you hit, I don't know exactly what it's like over there, but over here, 12 hours is kind of the magic number, right? As soon as you hit 12 hours, 150 people can stand around and say, well, looks like our overtime starts if you're willing to pay us. It doesn't work that way in post.
Right.
You're all by yourself in that little dark room, and the producer comes in and says, you know what, we need another output. Can you stick around? And you're like, I was supposed to leave, but do I really want to be the difficult one and tell them that if I stay, I'm going to get paid overtime because it's just me? All right, I guess, fine. Just this once I'll do it, and just this once becomes every single night. But if you discuss collectively as a work culture for just the show you're on, you, the other assistants, and the editors, this is really important, that you decide this is not a culture that we want to perpetuate.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the argument that I try to make to people is that more hours is not better hours. Just because you're there longer doesn't mean you're doing better work. And I've proven that show after show after show, where I've worked with other editors that have slept on the couch. They've done multiple 6th and 7th days, working on the same show, same dailies, same showrunner, same deadlines. And I'm going home at 7:30 or 8 p.m. every night just because I've learned better time management skills. So it can be done, but it's a combination of establishing the right work culture, but also taking the responsibility upon yourself that you also need to better manage your time and just not expect somebody to swoop in and rescue you.
That's a really key. Eleanor, do you want to jump
in? I was just going to say that I've just finished my first job as an edit trainee, and one of the reasons why I really loved the job was because the team, the post supervisor, the director, and I suppose in the wider industry we were very lucky. The editor and the first assistant, they really promoted a really good working culture, and because of that, with all the new people coming in, as soon as you have your first job, you will want to go on to your next job, because lots of things that if it's a good working culture, because lots of people and friends of mine who've been like post-production runners or edit trainees, and they've had a very, very difficult job. Some of them have left their jobs or left the industry. And in terms of the same sustainability of the actual industry and mentoring people and bringing people up, the industry might actually run into challenges there if some people find that actually they're going to have to leave the industry because of the working culture. But because of this working culture of the team that I was a trainee on, because it was so good, I had a really, really great experience. And there's an example, if anyone wants an example. And when I went for my interview, the post-production supervisor, one of the first things he said to me was, we're not going to make you come in just for the sake of coming in. Obviously, if there's something that needs to be done, we will get it sorted. But we really care about our team. And that was one of the greatest things to know as well.
That's refreshing to hear. And I have to say, in the number of years I've been doing this, and when I've heard people feedback similar information, it has been more TV shows where I've heard that than films. I have heard it on some smaller films and independent films as well, because there isn't that like big studio, big budget kind of pressure, and it's much more balanced. But it does seem to potentially be more TV orientated, which I think is useful for people to hear if they're new coming into the industry. I think we touched on a little bit in the breaking into post one, but there's certainly an element from it there. One of the other things that I thought was interesting about what you said, Zach, was it kind of touches on soft skills and stuff, because we're not just talking about learning the software really well and being great at storytelling and editing. There's this whole other range of skills that you need to be more in control, to be able to push back, to set boundaries, to do it professionally, to do it courteously, but to be doing it. And also something else that I've learned a lot about in the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years, more than I had done previously, as well as the thing you were saying about the people being connected to the money and just taking the job and how things are going to change is if we let out the money control us, we wouldn't potentially spend it, meaning we just have to then take the next job to keep the money coming in, so a certain cycle can develop. And I don't want to sit here, of course, and in any way be telling people what to be doing with their money, but something that I've started to think about more in the last few years as I moved up the ranks was, if I have savings, if I have X amount of months of salary put aside, if I have a nest egg, I don't just have to take the next job. I can think about what I want to do and ask those questions and find people that I maybe want to. I mean, I got lucky. I worked with a great team of people and I kept going back. But they were demanding films, and it was always that balance of does one justify the other, which for me it did until I burnt out. But I think those are important things for people to hear and be aware of, right? That there's this whole other set of skills you need to have to be moving yourself forward that you can then share with others. And you touch on that in the Optimize Yourself as well.
Oh, I don't touch on it. It's the foundation of what I do.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it's all about all the other skills that you don't learn anywhere else, right? So the hard skills as an editor that you're told, well, I'm going to need to be really good at Avid or Premiere or whatever the NLE of choice is, and I probably need to learn some After Effects. I need to be really good at media management, and then if I'm going to be on the creative side, I need to know storytelling, and I need to be good in the timeline and asymmetrical trimming. Just tunnel vision, right? It's all about the creative process. I want to be better at my creative job, all of which is great. That's all obviously very, very important to being a very successful creative professional. But nobody talks about all of the other skills that you need that not only supplement, but will strengthen your creative abilities, which include your ability to build relationships and network, and as you alluded to, your ability to manage your finances. There are so many people that have worked through my program that say the same thing. I'm coming to you because a decade ago, I took one gig that I didn't really want, but I did pretty well on it. Then somebody had another one, then somebody had another one, then somebody had another one. And 10 years later, I'm saying yes to stuff over and over and over that I don't want to do because I can't afford to say no. And they get themselves what are called golden handcuffs. And the reason they don't have that freedom is because their lifestyle expands to meet the amount of money that they're making, and they never built a backup plan. So they can't say no to anything because they can't financially afford it. And I've always been in a position where I can say no to something because I know I can support myself for months. And that's not because I make a lot of money. I mean, I've got 2 kids and I live in Los Angeles, so I can assure you I don't have a lot of money sitting around, but it's always been a priority for me to learn the soft skill of money management. And I know money management in workflows and automations just as well as I understand post-production workflows, to make sure that I know if I'm on the job and I'm making more money than I need to meet my basic living expenses, I'm not thinking, woohoo, extra money. I'm thinking, how much of that do I need to put away and automate such that I can buy myself X number of months so I can say no to things that aren't a good fit and I can say yes to something when it does come along. And that's where this program came from, where for years I was at the point where I would say, all right, I'm on a show for 7 or 8 months and I can afford to go maybe 1 or 2 months to wait for the next show or go between seasons. Then I would make it, well, can I go 3 months? Can I go 4 months? Well, great. What am I going to do with all this time? Well, I can work on my podcast. I can write more articles. And then eventually got to the point where, can I go more than 6 months a year without an editing job and just focus on this? Which basically for the first 4 or 5 years that I was doing this, I essentially took my money and threw it into a fire. That was what I was doing all day, every day. Because it's not free to have a podcast and a program and all. Like you've seen the back end. There's a lot of different tech that goes on other than me getting in front of a mic and posting an MP3 file to the internet, right? Right. So for years it was costing me a lot of money, but I would just focus on how many more months can I buy myself by automating my finances properly. And I got to the point where it was 4 months of editing, 8 months of doing what I'm doing. And this year, whether it was my choice or not, because there's no editing work, the question became, all right, can I just make it? Can I get on the life raft and can I survive in the ocean without knowing that I have the safety net of the editing job? But that all comes from the skill of being able to better manage money. And I think that when it comes to being able to choose projects, going back to this idea of creative needs versus lifestyle needs, you need to be able to build relationships with people. So what I talk about, the core fundamental concepts of anybody that's going to be successful in this industry, one of the most frustrating things is that because we're not doctors or lawyers or accountants, we don't know what the path looks like. So if somebody said to me, how do I become a doctor? I'd say, go on Google. You'll get an answer in like 2 minutes, right? Do this for this many years, go to this kind of school, get this degree, this many years, bam, you're a doctor, you've got the white coat. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's simple. We all know the steps. But in our world, we have no idea what the steps are, which means that we have no confidence whether or not the actions that we're taking are making any difference whatsoever. So what I always talk about with people is that there are 3 fundamental steps. The first is that you have to identify what's the ladder that I actually want to climb, which is what we've been talking about. Is it features? Is it television? Is it documentaries? What's creatively fulfilling? What's going to fulfill my lifestyle needs? Then you have to be awesome at your craft. But the piece that everybody misses, because we're all introverts and we all just want to sit in our dark rooms by ourselves and not have anybody bother us, people have to know you are awesome at your craft. Otherwise, you're just going to wonder, when is somebody going to discover me? It doesn't work that way. You have to make sure people discover you. And those are soft skills that nobody talks about in our industry. And once again, I said, I need to learn this stuff. I need to get better at it. So I had to go to other resources outside this industry. And I thought, all right, well, I guess once again, I'm just going to have to build these resources. So that's kind of the next stage of the program that I'm building now, is beyond the work-life balance and the productivity and the time management. I'm now helping people learn how to build relationships. And luckily, because I'm a self-proclaimed extreme introvert, and I've basically been doing social distancing at the Olympic level for 15 years now, I've got a really good system to virtually build a network when you can't go to mixers and events, because I frankly don't really like going to mixers and events. So that's now a new soft skill that I've added to the repertoire that I'm developing as we speak.
And these things actually, although it seems like a tenuous link, I do personally think that all these things we're talking about here with the soft skills, the finance, the money management, the networking, if we are training ourselves to get better at this alongside our Avid skills or our Premiere skills and alongside our storytelling skills and our editing skills, then it does lead to people who are more in control of themselves, and as much as they can be, obviously, because there's always a push and pull between you and the people you're serving in the cutting room and into production. But more of us feel more confident, therefore more of us are talking to each other openly about these things because we're feeling confident and we're not feeling threatened. And as a result, the community grows bigger, and as a result, more people are then thinking and prepared to start pushing back against excessive schedules, against long hours, against undercutting people with pay, and so on and so on. And for me, that's what links into the articles you wrote. That is how we change the game, and it's going to take time and it's going to be slow, but it's everyone sort of working together directly and indirectly, kind of upskilling themselves across all of these things to almost become the next generation, the new generation of people coming in. Because eventually a bunch of us are going to get older and rise up the ranks and become next level first assistant editors and the editors and the HODs and the managers and producers. And we can, I feel it's not unrealistic to say that we can actually reshape the industry as just the natural evolution of change takes place. I mean, I think Steve Jobs said it really nicely at that commencement speech. He's so famous that it's like, it's not a fun thing to say, but you know, death is life's great change agent. It gets rid of the old to make room for the new. And this is the next generation's chance to come in and actually assign this way of working maybe to the 20th century.
Well, let's hope, right? I mean, for me, I think that the biggest agent of change is one word, and that word is no. And no is a really, really scary word. So if we're talking, let's put you in the position that you're in now and hypothetically talk about you come into the show and you feel like, you know what, this seems like it's going to be fairly decent hours. I talk to them, the deadlines aren't crazy, but then all of a sudden the unrealistic schedules just do this, right? We've all seen this happen. It's this accordion effect where all of a sudden things become very, very unrealistic and unmanageable. But if you're in a position where you haven't better managed your finances, and you don't have a network of people and you're thinking, oh my God, it was so hard to get this job. And if I lose this job, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I don't know anybody else. It could take me months to find another one. Of course you're going to say yes. But if you put yourself in a position where financially, you know, if you have no other choice, you can walk, and you've also built a network of professionals that you can leave and say the next day, you know what, I'm going to reach out to these 10 different people, and hopefully in the next few weeks I can get on a show. It is so much easier for you to have the confidence to say, no, I am not going to meet your unrealistic deadlines and expectations. A phrase that I've used more than once that probably doesn't make producers or directors or showrunners terribly enamored with working for me, but I've said it more than once, that your lack of scheduling is not my problem. That is your problem. So if these deadlines are unmeetable, you need to fix something, because I'm not going to sacrifice myself for your unrealistic deadline. So a story that I've told more than once before is when I just began Cobra Kai. It was season 2, but it was my season 1. And it was maybe the first week or two they had brought on basically the entire post-production department. They had done an overhaul, and it was all new people. And the producer that was running the department, she had sent us the calendar for the season. And it wasn't even her calendar. It was more the studio kind of putting together a preliminary calendar based on the shooting schedule. We were all trying to figure it out. And she came in and we talked about the calendar, and I just set the record straight right there, knowing that if what I had said wasn't going to come off well, I probably wasn't on the right show. And I said, listen, I got your calendar. This is what I have to say. As long as you understand that I'm not going to be able to meet a single one of your delivery deadlines, then you and I are going to get along just fine. If you expect that these are meetable, then I'm on the wrong show, because these expectations are not meetable. And P.S., I'm actually pretty good at what I do, and I can't hit any of your deadlines. And she kind of laughs, and she's like, yeah, I know. Calendar needs a lot of work. We'll figure it out as we go along. And I thought, all right, we're good. Like, we're going to be able to figure this out as a team, and we work together with what were somewhat unrealistic expectations. But if I just said, oh, yep, I'll do my best, I'll make sure that I meet all of these, and I sacrifice myself without telling anybody, and I do unpaid nights and weekends because I don't want to look bad, I don't want to be the difficult one. But instead, I just said, no, I can't meet these expectations. Not because I'm not good at what I do, not because I'm poor at time management. I'm very good at what I do, and I'm excellent at time management. I can't do this. So let's figure out another way. And that set the course for the culture of the show for the next 2 seasons.
That's great. I think that's a great example. And saying no, like you said, it sounds simple. It's hard to do. And
simple, not easy.
Simple, not easy. And you get better at it with practice. And it took me a while, and it took time to find a way to do that as well. And, you know, you have to manage upwards. And I think I would say for people coming into the industry as assistants and new people coming up, learn your manager, you know, like try and, I think we can take what you just said there earlier on and actually be like, okay, Eleanor, you know, you as a trainee, you can kind of interview your first. You know, if someone's interviewing you for a job, you can interview that person and first and kind of get a feel for how they're going to be as a manager, and potentially let that help you decide whether that's the job I want to take, or maybe the post supervisor, because they may be the person interviewing you as well, or a combination of the two. And that's something that we can all take away, unless we really need the job, of course. And in that case, refer to earlier points about financial management and so on and so on.
Exactly. And one thing that I want to add to that too is that you need to learn how to frame saying no in the right way. This is another communication skill that, especially amongst introverts and editors, like, communication skills are not our strong suit. If it were, we probably wouldn't spend our lives in small dark rooms by ourselves. But the really important communication skill is reframing. So if it's a matter of, no, I'm not going to meet your expectations, these are dumb, obviously that's not going to work. However, the way that I frame it is, I want to be able to give you the best show I possibly can. You are not setting me up to be able to do that. If you want me to cut a great show, and you want me to be just as energetic, as enthusiastic as I am on the final day I lock picture on the finale as I am today, this calendar is not going to allow that. So what you need to do is set me up for success instead of barely making sure I don't fail. And I think that's a fallacy of the way that so many calendars are set up in our industry right now. It's just about the money, but they're thinking, how can we make sure people don't fail? Instead of, how do we set people up to succeed and get the most out of them? And because the business and the work culture is not set up that way, I have to do it myself. But I'll say to the showrunners, listen, you guys want to work late, that's fine. But I'm going to come in tomorrow and I will have mortgaged hours of creativity to get in these extra 2 hours tonight. So it's actually a net loss. So why don't we just call it a night, start fresh tomorrow, and we're going to end up being further ahead by the end of the week anyway. And when you reframe it as, I'm doing this for the sake of the show and for the sake of all of us, as opposed to, well, I just don't want to do this, this is dumb. That's one way to be able to soften the blow of saying no, is always reframing it around other people's needs.
And in relation to all of this, I think, you know, the key thing here is that maybe this pandemic has given us all time to just actually stop and think about this stuff. Because when you're just going from show to show, it's a lot of reactive kind of living and a lot of reactive thinking, and you're just getting by day to day, and you're just getting by show to show, and you don't always have the time to really step back and kind of think about this stuff. And I'm hoping that this webinar and all these webinars and just the time, everyone can put on the brakes a little bit and think about this stuff, and kind of, we can all revamp ourselves as we go back to work and think about things we want to start slowly trying to change. And I think, if there's any first or editors listening, you guys are HODs. Maybe there's some stuff here that is useful for how you can run your teams and how you can approach your people. And, I'm just thinking about all the stuff I've worked on, certainly when I was a junior, I don't think there was really a situation where people sat down and talked about things in the way you suggested, sitting down, let's have a team discussion about how we want to work. There was talks about how we're going to organize the Avid products. And there was talks about, like the technical side of stuff, but not so much that other side of it. And it's something that I certainly tried to do as a first. And when I was running projects for Eddie, I certainly tried to think about the team and the teams. In fact, I would hope a couple of the people would back me up on this as well. We'll find out. I felt responsible as a first to take on additional work so that people could leave the cutting room. And I'd be like, no, don't worry, I will stay late. I'll do that. I'm on I have the role of the first assistant. I'm being paid more than you. You go home to your wife or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or, whatever, because you don't need to be here. And that's something that we can all take on. And the other thing that I learned going on, which is something I would pass on to anyone and to you, Eleanor, and other people, is you can't always tell until you're working with someone. But once you've worked with them, if it doesn't fit your values and they were bullies or they just didn't manage effectively or whatever, maybe have a little list, and make a list of people that aren't good to work with again, so that you don't have to take a job with them because you need the money. You've got your system set up so that you can find the people you want to work with, and then you create your own network. And it's hard to do. I think it's hard to do, but it's a good kind of system and a rhythm to have going on there. It's 8:40 at this end, which means it's 12:40 for you, Zach, I think.
Correct. Yes. It's a lot later for you, so I could go all day, but I know you guys are already into the night, so I'm going to leave it to you.
No, we're good. We've got plenty of time to keep going. The night is young, as they say.
Yes.
We can keep going as long as...
Speaking of work-life balance and getting more sleep, let's go all night.
Right, exactly. But I'm thrilled by the fact that, I had the evening to do this with you, and I wasn't sat back there doing turn. But I'm in prep. We're still in the prep period, so it's an easier period to do this. A month from now, we probably couldn't have done this. Who knows? Let's bounce into some questions, just a few of them now, and then we can always bounce back out and talk about some more stuff. See what kind of discussion that stimulates. The first thing I wanted to just jump on, I've got all four of them here, was from Chris Chow. He says, "Hi Zach, some editors are proud and vocal of being workaholics. Would you say this attitude is damaging to our industry? How should we discuss this without offending them?" We've touched on it a bit, but do you have anything more you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's damaging to our industry. I think it's defined the work culture of our industry, are all of the workaholics. And this is something that I address actually in an article that I just released today, that when it comes to the exploitation of people in the creative fields, it's so prevalent and science is backed up that it is in fact true that artists and creatives are taken more advantage of than people in non-creative industries, so much so that there's now a term, and it's called the passion tax, where we're so passionate about what we do and we just want to be a part of it that we're willing to work for these exposure bucks, right? Oh my God, I'll get exposure and IMDb Pro credit. And this is not a new idea. People have been talking about this for a while, but there's actual research that backs it up. And one of the things that I argue, that I talk about with this idea of the passion tax, is that the creative work that we do is literally habit forming and it's addictive. So if you think about, we're sitting in the timeline, we're creating these ideas and we're cutting a scene, we get a dopamine hit every time we make a right decision. We have a really good cut. We all know that feeling of you have a montage you're putting together and then you slug in a piece of music and then that one beat hits on that one moment. You're like, oh my God, that was amazing, right? So that's a dopamine hit that we get. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's linked to all addictive behaviors. So essentially, as editors and creative professionals, we are chasing our next high, which is why we become workaholics. And I think it's not just a matter of people that are working for the sake of work or working for the sake of money. It's also working for the sake of that creative high that we get. But what we've seen is that workaholic culture has gotten us to where we are today. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you can just tell a workaholic, we'll just work less, right? So I think that the way to reframe it is to help them better understand that they can still get the positive feelings and all of the emotions that they get from doing their job, and actually get it more if they work less. And that's really hard for people to understand, but plenty of science has proven that productivity and creativity just plummet after about 45 hours a week, which is like a half day for most of the people doing what we do in this industry. So yeah, if you're a workaholic and you're a part of the old guard and it's just a matter of, you suck it up and you do what you're told and you pay your dues, there's only so much that can be done with that as far as convincing someone. Then you have to ask yourself the question we've talked about already many times: do I want to be a part of this? But I found that if you can reframe it for people that are at least open to the discussion, that they can actually enjoy what they do more by doing it less because they feel better doing it. But just trying to confront somebody that they're wrong. I mean, how many people here have gone on Facebook and shared their opinions, and the response was, "Oh my God, you've completely changed the viewpoint of my world. I appreciate your positive comments." Like, that's not how it works, right? So you have to fight that battle when you come to it. And frankly, it's that workaholism culture that I'm trying to slowly erode. But that's coming from a self-proclaimed workaholic to this day. I mean, work is my addiction. I just find different ways to provide a different level of value to the world without it completely destroying me. Mm-hmm. But I'm also a workaholic, so I understand where that comes from.
How much does your family life play a role in that though? Like, how much is your partner and your wife good at keeping you in check when perhaps you could go 100% on the optimize yourself course all the time? And do they ground you in a way? And how important is that to you? For workaholic personalities.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that they ground me, but I would say if anything, they're not aggressive enough. So really, when it comes to, like, for example, I've worked harder since the pandemic hit than I have in years, just because all the things that I've talked about went from pre-March. It was, oh, that sounds good, I'll get to that stuff eventually when I have time. And then all of a sudden it went from would be nice to have to I desperately need this stuff now. So now there's been a lot more demand, more people listening to the show, and more people emailing me, and more people joining the community, because they're saying, I desperately need to figure all this out because I don't want to go back to normal. So I've been working harder, but it's not necessarily my family overtly saying, you need to stop working now and come out of the office. It's more, you can just feel it, right? You can just feel when your kids are sitting on the couch and you're like, oh, I've got to jump on another Zoom call. Oh, I thought we could play a board game. And you're like, all right.
Was harder longer during the pandemic? Was harder longer though, or was it still within a reasonable contained period of hours?
Oh no, I would say that it's still very much contained within a reasonable period of hours. One of the things that I've done, and this is a really useful trick for anybody that also suffers or deals with ADHD, ADD, procrastination, is that you constantly have to set deadlines and create boundaries for yourself, which is really, really difficult. But if I don't give myself those boundaries and deadlines, I will work 20 hours a day. And I know that because I've done it more than once, because that is the addiction that I try to feed. Yeah. So I just said to myself, what's the life that I want to lead given our present circumstances? Knowing that my family is home all the time, it makes it easier for me to connect with them, and I don't feel quite as much pressure to think every moment that they're home, we have to be connected and I have to be present. Before, when they were going off to school and they were going to their events and I was going off to my job, when all of us were in the same space together, there was a lot of pressure, a lot of it self-imposed pressure, but also from them to say, hey, we're all home, we need to spend that time together. Now there isn't so much of that, but I still set very self-defined deadlines. So I've basically every day what I'll do just to keep myself in check is, if my son is out in the couch in the living room, whatever he might be doing, I said, hey, 7:30 tonight, we're going to watch the finale of the Titan games, right? Because I know that if I don't do that, then I'm just going to keep working until 8, 9, 10 o'clock. But if I told him, I'm going to be out here at 7:30, you and I are going to watch TV together, then if I'm not out by 7:35, what's up? You said we were going to watch the show. I'm like, well, now I'm just being a bad dad.
Yeah.
So it's all about setting these external expectations and deadlines to keep yourself in check. So I pretty much work about a 12-hour day, but that 12-hour day also includes exercise. It includes an hour for lunch sitting outside. It includes 2 walking breaks. But for me, when I turn the switch on in the morning, that's when I start exercising. It's usually about 7 a.m., give or take. And then around 7 or 7:30 is when I switch off and I'm done. And for the work that I'm doing and the condition that I'm in, that's been working really well for me for about the last 4 or 5 months. But you got to set realistic expectations and deadlines.
And with regards to, I'm putting you on the spot here. I didn't ask you to do this before we started, but I don't know, do you have like a screenshot of a calendar that you could just screen share, for example, as an indication of how you break your day down? I don't know if you've got it. I just thought I'd ask.
I certainly, you should know me well enough by now to know that I, of course, have one.
Yeah.
So give me 1 second.
Just to give an example to people of how you kind of structure your day and manage it. And it's interesting, one of the things that, whilst you're pulling it up, this is really interesting for me because it's something that I tried whilst, I have to admit, I tried, the time blocking whilst we were doing the OY, and I had a phase afterwards where it worked well, and then I kind of dropped away from it and then got it back again a bit, and mixed results. And then being back on a show where I'm not managing my time, so to speak. It's a lot, it's a lot harder to be doing this time blocking and organizing and just not being reactive person.
Exactly. Well, going back to something you said a little while ago, is you said when you get on a new show, it's all about, Avid Bins and Nexus and this and that. It's all about media management, but nobody talks about time management. And I frankly think that time management is just as or even more important than bin organization and workflows, because if everybody's not managing their time properly, that's why everybody's working the insane hours that they're working. So let me bring up a shared screen of what I call my ideal weekly calendar. So for anybody that's not a calendar person, they're just like, what is that? Oh my God, this is insanity. But what I've done is I've defined what the perfect week will look like for me. Every minute of every day is blocked out. This is not my real calendar. I want to make that very, very clear. This is an ideal calendar. But I want to ask myself, if I have the perfect week, what am I doing with my time? Where am I putting my attention? So it doesn't mean that I have work-life balance as far as an equal number of hours working as I do with family, but it means that I have work-life presence, which means that when I'm with my family, I'm with my family. When I'm working, I am working. So I know that give or take at 2 o'clock every day, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I'm going to be in deep work mode, hyper-focused. My family knows not to bother me. We have all these signals and signs to communicate with them very clearly during these periods. Unless it's an emergency, I'm unavailable. But then other times, if I'm here with family or I'm checking in with them between blocks or wherever it is, it's the opposite. If a client wants me, if somebody I'm working with wants me, well, tough. I'm not available. I'm spending time with my kids. So this is an exercise that I know that I walked you through and I walk many of my students through, where it doesn't seem like from a technical perspective this would be that difficult. It's just a bunch of colored blocks. But when you're forced to do this, it brings up so many questions about the way you manage your time and the way that you manage your life. So it's not necessarily about the result. It's what are all of the questions that this forces me to ask myself about how I spend my time right now. Because the big thing that everybody always says, whether it's I want to get healthier or I want to learn a new skill or I want to, whatever it is, they all say the same thing. I would do it, but I can't find the time. Well, guess what? The time is right here. You don't have to find it. It's right in front of you. This is the one equalizer. Every single person on this call and every single person on this planet has the same 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. So it's a question of how do you prioritize it, because you're never going to find more of it. This is not going to happen. And if somebody does learn how to find more, please let me know, because I would love to use it.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's all about prioritizing it. So this is a fundamental exercise that I force myself to go through anytime that my schedule is going to change, to ask where do all of the most important priorities in my life belong on this? And if there isn't time on the calendar, well, then I'm kidding myself. It's not really a priority.
And then I suppose one of the other things you're getting quite good at is you working out how long things would take. Because one of the biggest issues I had with this was trying to estimate how long things would take to do to be able to block the time effectively in the first place, which to a certain extent, you just have to do it and try it and see, and then feed back to yourself, right? About, oh, well, that took an hour longer than I thought it would. Why did it take an hour
time blocking
longer?
is what forces you to learn that, right? So what you measure, you can improve upon. So you can't say, well, I'm just going to kind of figure it out as I go. As you measure it on your calendar, you realize how grossly you're underestimating certain tasks, but you get better at estimating how long it will take, but you have to measure it. And this is how I teach people to measure it.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, other people can comment in the chat or in the Q&A or whatever they want to do. I found this an incredibly hard mindset to shift into from being an assistant editor, because a lot of the job essentially is being reactive to someone walking in your room and saying, can you do this? And so I almost, I had subconsciously convinced myself to give up on doing this, or not even attempt it, as I was transitioning from 25 to 35, because I had just habit patterned myself into being someone who I had a list of things that I know need to get done, but I'm not going to take the time to schedule them onto a calendar, because the odds are that's just going to get thrown out the window immediately. But then the way that then impacts your personal life as well is quite profound, because you end up approaching life that way. Oh, I'm not going to book something to do on the weekend because your mind doesn't work. I mean, some people can obviously do it. I'm not talking for everyone here, but I'm sure there's a subset of people like me who've struggled greatly on the weekend to switch into scheduling time for the partner, or, exercise for yourself, or whatever. You're just recovering from fatigue, and it takes time. But I just wanted people to see what it looks like from a well-practiced individual who has taken the time to do this.
And communication is a huge, huge part of this. So yes, as an editor, for the most part, I have pretty good freedom of my time, and I can choose how to use it as I see fit. As an assistant editor, it's a very different world, where people can knock on your door 78 times a day, and you're no longer an assistant editor, you're a firefighter. You're just putting out everybody else's fires, and you're in reaction mode, right?
Right.
But if you communicate with your team, and it's not about, hey, stop bothering me, but it's instead you going to an editor and saying, listen, if you ever need anything, you can always knock on my door, but here's what I'm trying to practice. I really want this block in the morning, just as an example, from 10 a.m. until 12:30 p.m. I really want to knock out my most important tasks of the day. Is it conducive to our workflow, just between the two of us, for you to not knock on my door or not reach out to me via Slack or whatever it might be if you're working from home, knowing that I'm getting the most important work done? And of course, if you need something and it's time sensitive, you bother me and it's fine. But you start to communicate about what you want your day to look like. And when you have a clear set of boundaries, it's actually way easier, even as an assistant, to be able to do these deep work sessions. But we always excuse it away, saying, I can never do that. People bother me all day long. Part of the reason people bother you all day long is you let them.
Right.
This is, again, we're saying no, but saying it in the nicest way possible and reframing it so they understand it's for their needs. It's going to be a lot easier for you to be able to create some of these blocks.
And that's where, like you said, the working relationship between the people in the cutting room are so important, because if from the top down, the approach is just one of, we're just open to helping everyone, everything, anytime, wherever, whatever you need, whenever it comes, whatever hour, pushing back against that is going to be difficult. If you have enough people, it becomes more manageable. And that's obviously more possible on a feature film, I think, where the budgets are higher and you can have more people in the room. But the smaller the budget, the less that is enough. You could argue that there's less demands on a smaller film, but that's just generally not what I tend to hear from people. Right. In reality, it's like less money, more stuff just gets dumped onto fewer people. Because making a film is making a film. Dailies still need to go out, scenes still need to be assembled, edits still need to be posted, people still want things, reference, and so on and so on. And it's like, okay, we still got to get it all done.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's really it's all about communicating and setting the proper expectations.
Let's just take a look at the Q&A. Eleanor, have you got any questions for Zach or anything you want to jump in on whilst I take a look at the Q&A?
I thought the ideal calendar is a really great for anyone in the industry, whether you're an editor or a runner, to actually implement in your personal and professional life. Because when I made my ideal calendar, I, as you were saying, it was a great mindset shift into not being so reactive, and then actually realizing how much time I had in the day, and that I had less than I thought I had, but also that I was putting too much into one day. And it's a really great way, as you were saying, of actually prioritizing. So for anyone who is a post-production runner or a student on here, I definitely recommend it as well for your personal life. And then, as you were saying, Riccardo, with actually time blocking it out, you can actually, what I've started doing is some tasks that I haven't known how long they were going to take until I've done them. And then once I've done them, I will write it in and I'll track it on my Google Calendar, so that the next time someone asks me to do something, I'm like, I know how long that takes. And it's actually really great, and it will actually help you in the cutting room as well. And when I was an edit trainee as well. I used that for when I was given a task like export this QuickTime or something like that. You can use it to actually tell your assistant how long you think you're going to take as well.
I think that's a really, really good point that I want to add to. So we'll use the export of a QuickTime as the perfect example. So if a post producer that doesn't really understand the tech side of things says, I need this QuickTime in 15 minutes, and you hit the export button, and it says, will be finished in 57 minutes, well, you can say, I can't give it to you in 15. And they really don't have an argument. They're going to say, oh, all right, well, that sucks. I guess I'm going to have to reset my expectations because I thought it would take you 15, but the computer tells me it's going to be 57 minutes. So I can't just tell you make it render faster. I have to reset my needs knowing that that's the best you can do. Now imagine being able to do the same thing with a deadline. And I've done this before, where somebody has come in and they've said, listen, we need you to deliver the cut on this day. And I said, I can't deliver the cut on that day. Well, you have to. Let me show you my calendar. Let me walk you through how I blocked out all of the things that you've asked me to do. And I open up my calendar and it looks similar to that. And this is the reaction I get. Oh my God, you're right. All right, I'll move the deadline. But you have to have that skill to be able to do that. So the reason that I don't end up working these crazy late nights and weekends is because of my calendar. I show it to them and I said, this is what you're asking me to do today. So on Cobra Kai, for example, it's a show that's cross-boarded. And for those that don't know what that means, it means they're shooting multiple episodes at once. So it was a 10-episode season and they shot it in blocks. So 1 and 2 were simultaneous, 3 and 4 were simultaneous throughout the whole season. And I was on season 3 on episodes 1, 4, 7, and 10. And at one point, I had all 4 episodes open simultaneously. And they were saying, we need this by this day. I'm like, well, that's great, but what on my calendar needs to be removed? Because you also said you need this for episode 1, for 4, and for 10. So how do you expect me to do this for 7? So instead of me just saying no, I say, I'm happy to meet that expectation. Tell me what it is that you no longer want me to meet, because there are only so many hours in the day. And once I can prove to them with my calendar how long something takes, they don't fight back. But what happens a lot, and I've heard this from post producers directly that have told me this, is they said, well, editors are just, oh God, they're so super sensitive and they just want their time to get it right and be creative, but I've got deadlines to meet. And I know that when an editor says they can't get it done, it really means they just want more time to be perfectionists, but I just need it finished. And I'm like, no, we actually don't have the time to do our jobs. But because a lot of editors, to be perfectly frank, are not very good at time management, they don't have the confidence to be able to say, no, it's going to take me this long to deliver. But if you show that you are good at time management, they can't fight back. So that's why the calendar is the secret weapon to being able to reset expectations and deadlines on any show. But you have to have the skills and the tools to be able to back it up.
Right, and you've got to be able to justify your argument.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a key point. A quick question you might be able to answer here is that we've got H. Lee saying, I noticed deep work on your calendar. What is that, please?
Oh, I don't know if that's a quick one. I could go on this all night. The joke that I had said before we started is they're like, well, it's going to be about an hour and a half. Do you feel good about that? And I said, you take the string on the back of my shirt and you pull it and I will go all night. Yeah. And deep work is one of those concepts that I could literally talk about for hours.
Give us the Cliff Notes.
I was going to say that the Cliff Notes version is listen to the episode that I do with the creator of the concept deep work. It's an author named Cal Newport. I don't remember the exact number. It's maybe episode 35, 40. Maybe you can do a search and you can send a link in the chat for everybody. But deep work is essentially this idea that when you're doing something, you're doing just that. So as creatives, especially with all the deadlines that we have, usually the way that it works for most people, the default mode is, I'm editing a scene, I'm watching shots, ding, ooh. All right, I'll just do this email real quick. All right, I'm back to editing. I'm going to watch a few more shots, get a couple cuts done. Ooh, text message. All right, well, let me check my text message, right? The brain is not able to multitask. We think we're good multitaskers. We're actually really good at switching from one individual task to the next, but that comes at a huge cost to, number one, our creativity, and number two, just our energy. That's why at the end of a day, even though we've just been sitting, we feel like we've been hit by a Mack truck. Like our brains just can't function because we make micro decisions all day long. And deep work is this idea of getting into a state of flow, or as people talk about it a lot, getting in the zone. So the blocks that I have that say deep work, that means for 90 minutes, I'm doing one thing. I'm either editing a scene, or I'm writing an article, or I'm writing a lesson for the course, or I'm building a web page. But I give myself one job. For 90 minutes, this is what I'm doing. I'm not checking email, I'm not checking Slack, I'm not doing anything else until this task is complete. And you find that within about 20 minutes, you get into the state where time just kind of disappears.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you say, oh my God, it's been 90 minutes? That's not even possible. But that's what's happening in the brain, where time becomes very relative. And that is the number one secret weapon as a creative professional, is if you can learn how to do deep work, you're going to get stuff done so much faster. Yep. So like I said, I have a ton of resources about that. I even have a 4-part masterclass that teaches how to get into a state of deep work that's totally free. And I can provide a link to people if they're interested in going through that masterclass. But this is an area that I'm very, very passionate about.
Yeah, the deep work is, if you'd asked me a number of years ago, I would have scoffed at the concept, because I considered how good I was at multitasking on the films I worked on, and how Eddie would walk in and give me a thing that needed to be done, and then the post supervisor would walk in, and I used Things, which is this really good piece of to-do list software by a German company called Culture Code, and I would always log it immediately in the software, in the project, in the very structured system that I had, and nothing ever got missed. But there was always, like, then the follow-up of the 5 people coming in and asking me how the things were going, and I would be jumping back and forth between the two, and my brain was like all over the place. I got really good at doing that. Ironically, though, that doesn't make you a good editor, because you need to do the opposite to be an editor. So I find it ironic and slightly frustrating that the jobs we do as assistants actually in some ways are training us to, or the environments we work in as assistants, because of all the things we've touched on tonight, they are almost training your brain to not be a good editor, because you get into the habit of flitting back from one thing to the other, because there's so many departments that need things from you. Even if you're a good delegator, you still got to jump to delegate, to go back to the thing, to track the next job, to delegate that to the other person. Oh, the VFX has come in. Did the VFX person get it? And so on and so on and so on. And it really clicked for me when I was doing some short film editing last summer in the sabbatical that I took. And I worked so hard to implement what you were talking about, and turning on Do Not Disturb mode. First it was put the phone upside down in Do Not Disturb mode, but it was still on the desk. Then the phone went off the desk. Then the phone went into the cupboard, because it wasn't until I tried to be an editor properly on a short film, having not done it for a while, since 2012, I realized, Christ, like, days are going by and I'm not getting stuff done, because I'm probably only working for 45 to 60 minutes at most, if I'm lucky, because of what had happened. And so it's a critical skill, I think, to be able to have it. And the top editors do it. You do it. Eddie does it. Lee Smith on X-Men, he came in the morning, the door was, he said hello, got his coffee, and then the door to his room was shut. And I saw him twice the rest of the day. Once at lunch to say hello and have lunch, and once when he walked past the room to say goodbye in the evening, and didn't see him again. His door never opened, and Adam, the first, dealt with everything. Lee never got interrupted. And I was too young at the time, I think, to really appreciate what I was seeing, but I remembered it, and he was deep working.
Well, and at the end of the day, at least as editors, what's the reason that we get paid to do what we do? We get paid for our ideas. I can't generate ideas if you're knocking on my door every 5 minutes and you're pinging me on Slack and you're sending me emails. So yeah, you want to treat me like an artist, but frankly, you're managing my time like I'm your accountant, and I'm always at your beck and call, which is counterintuitive to the whole reason you're giving me money. You want me to generate ideas, make decisions, and create stories. I can't do that if I'm bothered all day long. So that's another expectation that I set with people. I will say to my producers, my other assistant editors, even showrunners, you want me to do my job well, you got to let me do my job. So I even have a do not disturb sign that I hang on my doorknob, just like I were at a hotel, where people know if it says do not disturb, unless it's time sensitive, do not bother me until I come out. But because of that, I'm out the door by 7:30 or 8 o'clock at the latest every single night. And if we go back to this idea that you were talking about, I'm so amazing at multitasking, and I've got things, and I'm doing this and that for the visual effects producer and my editor and the post producer, how well did all that work out for you when you went home at the end of the night or on the weekends?
It didn't work out that well.
Didn't work out so well, did it? So that you have to look at the full price that you're paying, where in the moment it might work, but then you're completely destroyed because your brain can't handle that speed. We just haven't evolved to be able to manage the speed of technology and communication the way that it is today. So for me, I'm only successful in the way that I work if at the end of the day, I'm still a human being. If I'm not, I'm doing something wrong and I need to fix it. And sure, there are always days where it's 8:30 at night. I'm like, oh man, what a day. But there's a difference between that and just not being able to summon the will to live because you are so destroyed. And even if you're great at your job and you're totally turned on, you're getting everything done, but you're a shell of a human being when you get home, then something's got to change.
I would completely agree with that. And as sometimes shell of a human being, I wholeheartedly second it and agree with that approach. So that was deep work, the Cliff's Notes. Let's look at another question coming in. I just also want to throw a shout out to Maria Zani and anonymous attendee, because they were commenting about having autism and ADHD, dyslexia as well, between the two of them, and other people have said stuff as well. And, you know, thanks for sharing that, guys. I appreciate it. You know, I've got a member of my family also on the spectrum, and I know what it's like. And, you know, the networking and the social stuff can be challenging sometimes for that. And you mentioned it too. There's a lot of introvert personalities in post-production here. So Maria was just saying it's really hard and she understands it. So thanks for sharing that. The anonymous attendee was saying, did you find a way to adapt how you work in relation to this, your diagnosis, and how did you navigate people accepting these adaptations? So we're talking here about mental health. We're talking about acceptance. I mean, this is an industry which created the Me Too situation, so, and is known for bullying. Acceptance, Zach. How did you deal with it?
Well, I think the first step is that I don't go around and tell every single person that I work with all of the things that I'm talking about today. Right. So the way that I look at it is I'm not going to a producer and saying, I just want to introduce myself. I'm going to be editing for this season. And by the way, I struggle with ADD. Like it doesn't work that way. Right. When I first started talking about all this stuff 7-8 years ago, and I was talking about mental health and depression and burnout and all of these subjects, people were just shocked. They're like, oh my God, nobody talks about this stuff. Like, are you crazy? Nobody's ever going to hire you again. And my thought was, well, I need to be honest about this because I don't think I'm the only one. And then it was confirmed in spades that there are tens of thousands of people in our industry that are battling this too. But it just started with somebody has to share it and needs to speak up about it. And I wasn't thinking that there was going to be some global movement around it. It was just, I got to be honest about what I'm going through so I can figure it out. And it just started with writing a random blog post and all kinds of people saying, oh my God, it's like you're crawling inside my head. I'm dealing with the same things. But when it comes to working on a job, if it comes up in conversation, I'm happy to talk about it. But at the end of the day, I take it as my responsibility to build the strategies and systems around me such that I don't have to have that conversation. So as somebody that deals with ADD, and I don't have ADHD, but I've worked with multiple people in my program that do have ADHD that are formally diagnosed. You can't just go around and tell everybody and use it as an excuse. Oh, I didn't get that done because I have ADHD. Sorry. That's not going to fly. But you can have an honest conversation and say, listen, here are a few different things that I struggle with. You might come in and give me 5 different tasks that need to be done during the day. I'm just going to be honest with you. Sometimes that's really, really hard for me. So one thing that you could do to help me is if I ask you, what would you like me to prioritize first? Help me work through what's most important to you, because executive functioning is something that's very, very difficult for people with ADHD. It's hard to prioritize multiple things. So one of the things that I will teach people specifically with ADHD is how do I break it down into really small pieces so I have to make less decisions, because decisions are really, really exhausting. But it's about communicating again. I want to meet your needs and I want to do the best job for you. Here's a challenge that I have. Let's find a middle ground where I'm not using it as an excuse. You know that it's something that I deal with, but let's find a way that we can all make it work together. Again, it all comes down to how can I communicate and be honest, and how can I set more realistic expectations?
Yeah, and I think it's really important also for people in managerial roles to understand these conditions and learn about them and how to communicate and network and discuss and remove the stigma of these conditions. And I feel like that is changing slowly. I mean, I can see a difference in that in the last 10 years. And I hope that over the continuing career that I have into my 70s and 80s up to I die, that this is going to be something that keeps changing, and we all just get better at this. I wanted to link in here, Zach, to the stuff you've talked about, which for me personally, this is like a red pill, blue pill matrix moment for me with the Gretchen Rubin stuff and the 4 personality tendencies, because I love that their tendencies are not traits, so that they're not so rigid and defined, because a personality is like a river, it's fluid, it doesn't just fit into one pattern. I'm very much an obliger with a little bit maybe of the one that's not the rebel and the one that's not the I'm forgetting one of the quick question.
Yeah, so you've got the upholder, the questioner, the rebel, and the obliger. Yes.
Yeah, I'm very much obliger and upholder, and it's really interesting reanalyzing filmic relationships through the spectrum, which you did a little bit, and you talked about how you're seeing producers very. I think it's interesting because you were commenting on producers being obligers and getting stuff done for directors, and they're upholders as well. They make
obligers and upholders primarily are a really good fit for a producer.
Yeah, I think that's true to a certain extent of assistant editors as well, being solid rocks in the cutting room for their editor, so that the editor can get on and do stuff. But then at the same time, there's probably a lot of editors who fall into that role too, to provide for the production and for the director. And you were talking also about there being directors often being, or potentially seeming like they're more rebel personalities than, and questioners as well, rather than I just think it's interesting the way you can sort of compartmentalize people into these different, it's based on the role, because someone who likes to do their own thing and rebel is more like to be wanting to be the leader of the ship rather than one of the crewmen.
Exactly. Yeah. So for anybody that's like, what in the world, the tendency,
what are they talking about?
What now? This is another one where I have an hour-long interview with the creator of this concept, of this framework called the 4 Tendencies. It's a New York Times bestselling author named Gretchen Rubin. She's one of the top podcasters in the happiness and psychology space. And if people go on my website and just search for Gretchen Rubin or the 4 Tendencies, this will come up. But yeah, I can tell you of the hundreds of students that I have, the vast majority are obligers. And the reason why they come to me is because they need somebody to teach them how to set their own expectations, and so they can also say no to other people, because an obliger's favorite word is yes. No problem. Yep. Happy to do that. Right? But to their own detriment, and saying yes to themselves is very, very difficult. Yeah. And for years, I didn't understand that, because I'm 0.0% obliger. Probably no surprise. But for anybody, just to give them, again, the super very detailed or very brief cliff notes. This is actually something I, again, talk about in the article I just released today, which is total coincidence, because you hadn't even seen the article, because it just came out. But I talked about if you want to be able to properly set expectations and say no, you have to better understand your tendency. And these tendencies are all around the idea of, how do I meet expectations? How do I meet internal expectations? How do I meet external expectations? The upholder is able to meet both. That's why producers are good as upholders, because they're very rigid. This is the deadline. It must be met. I must meet your expectations. But upholders are also the people, they can just wake up and exercise 5 days a week and we hate them. Like, seriously, how do you do that? Like, that's impossible. So they're a very small subset of the population, but they just follow through with things, but almost to their own detriment. So when somebody says, man, this person is really kind of anal, or they're really, really rigid, or, they can cause a lot of friction, those are the upholders. When it comes to the obligers, they're the polar opposite. They say yes to everything when it's external. When it's internal, they say no to everything. Well, I really should take care of myself, but, oh, no, I got to do this other thing from somebody else first. And you never make the room for yourself. Right. The questioner, they can meet both external and internal expectations, but only if it makes sense. This is me in spades. Well, that's great. I'm happy to do that for you, but why wouldn't we do it a different way? Isn't there a better way to do this? That's basically the question I've asked myself since I was born. There's got to be a better way to do this, which can be very exhausting, but it's also why I built this program, because I said there's got to be a better way to do doing the things that we're doing. And then the rebel, they struggle with both. They struggle when somebody else tells them to do something, like, you can't tell me what to do. But then conversely, they want to do something. I can't tell me what to do. So they struggle with both of those. And I'm a pretty delicate balance between a questioner and a rebel. Steve Jobs is another example of somebody where if you really break down their tendencies, he has been identified as being largely a combination of the two. And they're the most volatile to work with, but they're also the most innovative because they don't go with trends and they're willing to speak up and go against things because they rebel against expectations and norms, but they're also not doing it just for the sake of saying no. They're doing it for the sake of innovating and making things better.
Yeah.
But it can be very, very exhausting. And I've been told by multiple producers, you are great to work with until I ask you to do something. Because I always question, well, why am I doing it? Why can't I do that tomorrow? Like there's always a question to it. So what I realized about myself in learning the tendencies, and again, this goes back to our earlier conversation, how do I set myself up for success? How do I interview people to know that I'm the right fit? I know that I'm really good at working with people. I am horrible at working for people, which means that I need to work with somebody that sees me as a collaborator and an equal. If they see me as an extension of my workstation, it is not going to work, and there's going to be a ton of friction. It's also the reason why I gravitate towards being an entrepreneur, because I work for myself. That's a very, very common thing that you see is a lot of questioners and rebels end up going into the entrepreneur space because they really struggle just constantly being told what to do if it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think being aware of this stuff, to tie it into cutting room and post-production, being aware of this stuff's really important just to be, to understand the people you're working with. I think even if you're a junior member of a team, a trainee, understanding those above you in this way is really important. So you can manage your manager in some ways. You may not have control over your schedule or your hours, but if you understand your personality, if you understand the personalities of the people you're working with, you're going to be more effective at interacting and communicating with them. You'll be better at your job. You'll advance more quickly. And you'll also work out which people and which personality traits you click with and which ones are probably ones to avoid and steer away from. And I think that's just really useful stuff to know. And it's something I'd always been interested in from being young and just generally about how people work. And my mum was always in management. So a lot of this stuff she was talking about without using those terms. And then when I came across this through you, it really crystallized. For me, prior to that, it had all been about Myers-Briggs and the Myers-Briggs testing. And then you showed me the Gretchen Rubin stuff. And I was like, this is a much more effective way of breaking this down. And also it's got a little bit more of a lower barrier to entry. It's not kind of pigeonholing people as much. There's a little less resistance. People might be a little bit more open to having someone say to them, this is your personality tendency, rather than being like,
you are trait. This. You fit in this bucket. This is the only thing you are. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of types. Right. That's why I like the tendencies, because it's very open and broad.
In my dream scenario, this would be something that we can get into, like all cutting room teams, that people do this at the start in the in prep, if they have prep, which we're fighting to try and make normal, and people would understand a little bit more about this stuff. Ironically, of course, I always find that there's a certain personality type that is fairly dismissive of the concept of personality tendencies because they don't want to acknowledge or accept that. Probably a rebel, right? Probably like if the rebel doesn't agree with it or want to, or is questioning it, it's like, why do we need this? This isn't useful.
Yes.
We're just managing, right? We just got to do it. Come on, we don't have time for this.
Yeah, well, immediately when somebody's a questioner, when you say, I want you to identify one of your tendencies, well, why do I need to do that? Why does that even make sense? You're a questioner.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So now we need to get to work out how the skills to manage you in this cutting room for the next 9 months. Yeah. As you said, go on, Eleanor, jump in.
One thing that I found really great about learning my own tendencies, when I was doing the quiz and I completed it and I was reading it through and I was like, oh, yep. And it really helps, as you were saying, Riccardo, understand other people. And especially as you were like relating it to post, it can really help you understand how to communicate what you need. Because I'm a questioner. And I was reading, I was like, oh my goodness, yep, tick all these boxes. And then I also find myself, when I'm meeting people or with my own family or friends, it's now in the back of my mind. I was like, oh, I see you, like, you're a rebel, you
can't turn it off. You can't not see it with people.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's like the Matrix. Once you take the red pill, you can't go back. So every single person I meet now, I'm like, what tendency are you? Right? But once you better understand their tendency, it enables your ability to communicate more. So if I'm working with a producer that's an upholder, I just know there's going to be some friction because they're very set. It's got to be done this way. So I have to approach them differently because logic might not always work. right? So it's, and I also know what's a good fit for me to hire as an assistant editor. I had an assistant editor that was a questioner and loved her to death, but there was a lot of friction because two questioners do not mix, right? So one questioner says, do this, this, and this, and the other one says, yeah, but why? Because I've already done all of the analysis. I know this is the best option. Just do it. But why? Ugh. I'm the questioner. You can't be the questioner. So I know that for an assistant editor, I work very well with obligers.
Yeah.
But I also know that if I have somebody that's on my team that I'm collaborating with, I want them to be a questioner because I want them to call me out and tell me when my ideas are bad.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very helpful in that sense.
I think it is really useful because I think like in the 10 years I've been working with Eddie, like it was interesting to reframe my relationship with him in the cutting room through this prism, just as an experiment. Because, you know, I'm very much an obliger upholder. I took the responsibility of being his rock, as the obliger paperwork says. I took that very seriously. And I think Eddie's probably a combination of quite a few of them, actually. You know, he's definitely a questioner. If he doesn't think the workflow is right, he'll question it and we'll come up with a better one. He's got his own ideas about how to do things, so there's probably a bit of a rebel in, you know, like wanting to push for Mission to be done at 4K the whole way through post. You know, that's a little bit of a questioning rebel tendency there, I think, which ultimately benefited the film in an innovative workflow, which has been written about online and, you know, has benefited people in the home Blu-ray release as well, because it was 4K DPX at the top being pulled down to make the home Blu-rays. There's no upscaling going on or anything. And then at the same time, though, I would say there's a bit of an obliger in him because he was very diligent at making sure he delivered what was required to the film and to the producers and being their rock, if you will, in the next level of that thing. And so I was like, okay, I was his obliger, he was their obliger, but he was their, you know, you can really interestingly kind of understand all of your relationships through that. I mean, it's not foolproof and it's not a prison, but I think it really helps just making peace with what you've been through and what you might be going through. And you can be more tactical about it moving forward, which again helps with all your career development, which helps you become this more confident, capable person who can say no to things and play your role in shaping to change the industry into the one we all want it to be. Just to tie it right back to the start of this.
I was going to say, or you could just do more Avid tutorials, right?
Well, there's always
you could just learn Avid, and that's all you need to get better at your craft.
Which we all need to do now with the new 2020 version, when they've dropped the legacy QuickTime engine and they've got the new the Universal Media Linker or whatever it's called. The whole new load of stuff to be learning about now for the 2020.
I realized officially that I transitioned from the young guard to the old guard because my reaction to Avid 2020 was, I'm not learning that. I'm like, oh my God. I used to be the one that got so excited about the new tech and I wanted to be the first to learn. I'm like, stop touching my buttons. Don't move my stuff. Get off my lawn, right? That's kind of what ended up happening when I saw it. So I still haven't learned it. I'm still on the old version.
Well, there's time. I remember listening to a podcast where they were interviewing Doug Lehman and his editor. And they were talking about how they were doing the editing. And then at one point when they were on set, this was like back in 2009 or 10, so it would have been around the Jumper period, the Hayden Christensen movie, something like that. Talking of the, excited about software thing, they tell the story where the DIT comes running around or something on set and he's like, Leopard is coming, which at the time was the new OS that Apple were releasing back then, and how excited he was about it. And they were like, couldn't give a shit.
Yeah.
That's just the difference between the two.
Just let me cut and go home. I don't want to have to learn a new tool, but that just shows that I've officially made the transition to the old side of the business.
But your assistants who will be doing all your exports for you will rapidly want that new speedy export process. So they will be like, Zach, please, 2020, can you just get out of your lawn and come in?
When the time comes, I promise I will dive into it as obsessively as I do everything else, and I will learn it.
You can make it look like the old one quite effectively. So
good.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Q&A. Let's jump back to that. What is it? Coming up on 9:30 now. So we'll start to wrap this up. Mainly because I have to leave Leavesden at a very specific time because of the pandemic. I have a window to leave, so you guys can keep going, but I may have to disappear. Unrealistic schedules. I've started jobs doing normal hours, which slowly crept up to excessive hours because the schedule demanded it. And if I didn't do the work, then I couldn't meet the deadlines. Sometimes I can't make senior management understand why I need to leave at a sensible time. They just think I can't be bothered to do the extra hours. More comments than than a question. I feel like we've
Yeah,
kind
I
of
mean,
touched on stuff to do with all of that.
I saw this question come up, and that was one that I tried to kind of address on the fly without addressing it on the fly. But that just goes back again to communication, and here's why. Again, the questioner coming out of me. Let me show you my calendar and explain why I can't meet these hours, or let me reframe for you what I'm going to be like in a week from now if you ask me to work this way, and how little of use I'm going to be or anybody else would be. So that's always my the way that I will reframe unrealistic hours, unless it just is what it is and it's a crunch time and you have to deal with it for a short period of time. I'm also realistic, knowing that sometimes it just happens. There are going to be a few weeks where it just sucks. When I was on the finale for season 3 of Cobra Kai, which it's killing me that I can't talk about it, I would love to be able to talk about it, but there was just a month where I didn't see my family, and I woke up, edited, came home, slept. That was it. But I knew that going in advance, and I'd set that expectation knowing it was short term. But when it's chronic, that's where you have to speak up and really set those more realistic expectations.
The next one I wanted to touch on, I think it's important we just comment on it. Nolan Hobdell, as an editor that is a member of numerous post-production and social media groups, I find there is a dark gallows humor that exists in the groups where we will tell war stories and joke about the pains of the job. I get that we need to vent our frustrations, but I have a feeling that it's self-flagellating and creating a self-fulfilling environment where we expect to be treated this way. I wonder if the panel agree or have any experience of that. I think I agree with that. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with this kind of being the fundamental source of all the issues that we're talking about. If this wasn't a problem, I wouldn't be here. It's the way that I coin it is I call it everybody proudly wears their sleep deprivation badge of honor on their chest, right?
Yeah.
How little sleep did you get? Oh, I was at the office all night. I did 20 hours. 20? I've done 28. Oh my God. I once did 72 hours straight. Now, I want to reframe this for a second for people that are proud of the hours that they work, and like they said, it's kind of self-flagellating. I want to reframe this because when I reframe this, people kind of go, oh God, I never thought about it this way. Imagine that instead of being a workaholic, we were talking about alcoholics. And I want you to imagine that somebody comes into work in the morning smelling of alcohol, and they're a little tipsy and they're a little off and they're kind of slurring their words. Would we celebrate that person? We probably would not celebrate them. We would be concerned about them. We would pull them aside and we would say, I really don't think that you're fit for this job today. I think we need to get you some help, because that's what a good person would do. From a cognitive level, people that overwork themselves and sleep deprive themselves are at the same level cognitively that they would be if they were drunk. They've proven this. This is science. This is not something I'm making up. So you are cognitively at the same place if you get less than 6 hours a night as if you had a blood alcohol level of 0.08 or 0.1, which is legally drunk. But we come in and we celebrate that because it's this badge of honor or this toughness. But if it were drinking, we would never celebrate it. So if I want to be a creative professional and I want to generate ideas and I need to be creative, why wouldn't I sleep? That makes me worse at what I do. So the fundamental issue is this culture that not only is this the reality, but we celebrate the reality because we think it makes us tougher. When in reality, it's making us significantly weaker and sicker. And that's the big thing that I think that's changed with the pandemic is before you could just get more flies, like I talked about. But now people are literally going to be dying if they don't take care of themselves because their immune systems are going to be weakened.
Yeah.
And they put themselves into this state where they're overworked, they get sick, and then that's it. So that I think is the big game changer for us, is now the pandemic has put this under a much more, much brighter light.
And I think the sleep thing as well, I'm generalizing to a point here. I do feel that's cultural as well. I think that in England, being an English-speaking country, and America especially has this attitude. A lot of the CEO, there's just a very toxic, I think, attitude that comes over from American culture a little bit with that. And I hear it a lot. You know, Arianna Huffington did a whole thing about it where she did a TED talk about the tech CEOs and people boasting about only getting 5 hours of sleep, like you were touching on. I feel like because we share the same language, you know, and Hollywood comes to England and shoots so much stuff over here because we've got such good facilities and resources, I think that has come into England a lot more maybe than it has in other parts of the world. My dad is Italian, and so I have some European, you know, like connection, and my partner is from Germany, and just from talking to them and meeting people through family and just seeing the pace of life and the attitude towards life, I do feel there's a difference culturally between European attitudes towards work and life, and then this British American way of doing things. I'm generalizing there. There are people in all countries, of course, who are workaholics and do that. But if you're talking sweeping stakes here, then that is something that I would argue. On the flip side of though, you look at the amount of innovation that's come out of America as a result, perhaps, of some of that, then I'm not arguing that it's a good thing, but you can't ignore the facts. Obviously, there are plenty of other countries that have done amazing things and have had amazing people in them too. But it's a weird thing. It's a correlation, right? There's a correlation between some of those factors. I just think it's an interesting thing to acknowledge. I think when I speak to a lot of people who come from Europe to London to break into the industry and have contacted me for advice, and we talk about this stuff and we talk about cultural differences, a lot of them do comment on like, well, you guys are crazy. Like, why do you do these? Why are you working like this so much? And like when it's an adaptation process, but I think it surprises a number of people about it, especially in the film industry where it's even more kind of to the top.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Have you worked over here at all, Zach? Have you come and worked in Europe at all, or in the UK?
I have not, no, and I was really hoping that had there not been a pandemic, you could have flown me over and I could have done this in person, because I would love to see London.
Yeah.
But no, there have been a couple of projects potentially that I could have gotten on where I would have traveled, and I turned them down because they would have been long term and I wouldn't have been able to be with my kids. So I've done all of my work my entire career from somewhere in Los Angeles. So I'm very very spoiled in that sense.
There's the reason to take the film, because they can have the budget to fly you and your family over for a year, or whatever the.
True, that would be a cool experience for sure.
But then the trade-off is you upend your life, and you probably have to. They say to you, well, we paid for you to come over here, so we own you for a year.
Yes, yeah, and I would have a problem with that as a questioner.
Yeah, I feel like you would challenge it somewhat.
I would indeed challenge that. Yes.
Okay, there are two more questions on the open section of the Q&A. Let's see if we can just nail those and then see if anyone else has anything else. Start with Nicole. Do you have any advice for someone wanting to move into post-production as a mid-career move? Any particular training programs worth pursuing in the UK? So I think Zach and I probably won't be great at talking about training programs. I know, Eleanor, you might be able to jump over with some here, but general advice, Zach, for...
Yes. So I will be the first to say I have no idea what training programs you should pursue in the UK. No clue. However, I can tell you the number one strategy to make any career move. So it's not about I want to make a mid-career move into post-production. If your question was, I want to transition from working in post to being a professional basket weaver, what would you recommend? It's the exact same advice. You find the people that are doing what you want to do, that are perhaps 3 to 5 years ahead of you, and you make them your new best friend. You learn how they got where they are, what their steps were, what their lifestyle looks like, what their training looks like. Because you could say, what are the training programs that are worth pursuing in the UK? And then you talk to somebody that does what you want to do, and they're like, you don't need to do that. That's rubbish, right? There's no reason you need to be doing that training. Well, then you've just saved yourself time and thousands of dollars potentially. So find the people doing exactly what you want to do and make them your new best friend. That is the number one soft skill that if you develop, you're going to be able to make any transition you want. It alludes to what you talked about in the very beginning in the introduction. What is the likelihood that as an editor that has been stuck inside a darkroom for 20 years, that within 6 months of deciding I wanted to be a Ninja Warrior, I have Tony Horton as my trainer? Like, what are the odds of that? That seems insane. But it's because I said to myself, who is the number one person that needs to be my new best friend that's going to help me to get where I want to get? And I said, it's Tony Horton. It's the guy that made P90X. Bam, 6 months later, he's now my trainer, right? And he has been for over 2 years now, because it's the exact same strategy. So you say, well, if I want to make a mid-career move and I want to work in post-production and I want to be a producer, I need to seek out the people doing what I want to do, and I want to learn from them how they got where they are. It's that simple.
And it's not, to go meta here with what we're doing, that's why I got in touch with you, Zach. That's why I wanted to do the program. That's why I saw what you were doing and, wanted to get your mentorship the way you wanted Tony helping you with that. I saw someone who was doing what I wanted to do and doing it well. And
yep, it makes it easy. Why try and figure it out all by yourself when somebody already has?
Exactly.
right? Just ask them how they did it. Shortens your learning curve. So much easier.
Some more general advice that I would say as well, specifically relating to post-production in the UK. I think, Nicole, I don't know how old you are, but I think age is less of a factor now than it used to be. I think there was definitely some stigma towards, people in their like mid-30s, for example, like doing a career sideways move from one industry into the film and then having to be a runner or a PA because maybe they didn't, have the necessary skills to come in at a higher level. I've seen it, I've heard about it, I've read about it. But again, I think with all the change that's been happening in the last 10 years, that stigma is going away and people are way more open to doing it now. On the first film that I worked on then, the post-PA, a guy called Jez, who's a great guy and a great assistant editor himself and who's been working his way up the ladder and is doing really well now too. He started as the post-PA, he was in his early 30s. He'd been, I think, in finance before and hadn't, worked on an Avid. And he came in, he got the job as a Russia's runner on Jane Eyre and then was able to network his way into the cutting room on X-Men, and by the end of the job, he'd learned how to do stuff on the Avid, and the next he got to break on. I think he then went on to the Dark Knight Rises actually, with Lee, who he met on X-Men, and that was through just being in the right place at the right time, being friendly, and being someone that people wanted to be in a room with for 9 months, 10 months at a time. So it's like knowing what role are you going for, what people do want to work with, what does that role require, and as you've asked, are there any schemes that can help with get my foot in the door? But that will get you the interview. Once you've got the interview, it's about all of the stuff we've talked about tonight with your soft skills and your networking, and very much in feature films, which is my background. I can tell you that the biggest thing will be how to sell yourself as somebody that the personality of those people who have already got the jobs, are you someone that they will want to be in a room with for the next 6 to 12 months? Because if you can't make that work, the odds of you getting hired are fairly low.
And I'm going to add one more tiny thing on there. It's going, again, back to where I had corrected something you said at the very beginning about how you were attempting to get into TV. You said it's all about being in the right place at the right time. I want to shift that. This is a big thing that I help to reframe somebody's mindset. It's not about being in the right place at the right time. It's about putting yourself in the right place at the right time. That's the soft skill. If you can put yourself in the right place at the right time, that's when things start to happen.
There it is. So Nicole, hope that was helpful and worth sticking around for. I can see you're still on the chat. Oh yeah, Eleanor, please do. Yeah.
So to echo what Zack and Riccardo said, I started. This is slight questioner tendencies coming out again. But I've started a blog which you might find useful, and it's aimed towards post-production runners and students, and it's basically where I talk about or share resources that I found useful in my journey of coming out, because I didn't go to university, so which was the harder route of doing things, but I really enjoyed the way that I've come in.
Yeah.
And so on the blog, I've been sharing some different resources and film editing resources, and definitely check out that as well as the Rough Assembly website, because we have 2 really great webinars. One on how to break into post-production, which I did with my friend Imogen, and we were talking all about how to become a post-production runner, and another one with Riccardo and first assistants on their perspective from being higher up in the industry and how to break in as well, and you might find them really useful. And then from a personal perspective of what really helped me, actually in Zack's making in Hollywood guide, in there you can figure out and drill down to what you would like to do by doing a tornado exercise, and it really helped me focus on what I wanted. And then because I could figure out, okay, well, there's this whole film industry and there's all this TV, and I know I want to be an offline film editor and I don't know what in, and it really helped me find the right path for me, even though there's no path and we're not doctors, and as Zack was saying, but it really helped me figure out, okay, well, I can actually listen to these podcasts and I can find these resources, and that all you can, and as Zack was saying, finding people you can ask the questions to who are willing and kind enough to help you along the way would be a really great way of doing things. And Eddie Hamilton has a really great advice page, which was my holy grail, which I saw when I was in school. And he talks through different ways of becoming a post-production runner and what to do next and after that. And I'll put the link in for that as well.
Yeah. That's still very, he wrote that like 10 years ago. I think he's updated it now and again, but it's still very relevant to the initial sort of breaking in and getting in there.
Well, to add to that, if it's okay for a second, this is going to be 174% shameless self-promotion. But based on what Eleanor had just mentioned, she was talking about the guide to making it in Hollywood, where I walk people through the tornado technique, which is also something that I teach extensively in my program. This is a free guide. If anybody wants to download this, they can just go to optimizeyourself.me/Hollywood Ultimate Guide. And I also go way more in depth, and this is something, Eleanor, you wouldn't even be aware of yet because I'm still in beta and I haven't released it to anybody outside of my my coaching community. But I have a full networking masterclass where I teach not only the tornado technique, but also, like I said, how do I identify the people that I want to connect with and make them my new best friends. So this, they can just go to my website, optimizeyourself.me/IMDbPro. And this is all talking about the stuff that you've been alluding to extensively. So if they're like, well, what is that? Or how do I learn more about that? All of these resources are here and available to people. So
perfect. Thank you, Zach. To link this into changing the industry, whilst all this is going on, BECTU, the union over here in the UK, we're working on a campaign called Eyes Wide Shut, which is long-term. It's not going to be quick, but we are getting signatures. The petition's in the Eventbrite listing. If you want to click on it, we've got about 15,000 people signed up to that now to agree with, yes, we don't want to work these silly hours in film anymore, because as the saying goes,
you're doing way better than me. I've only got 1,500 on my petition.
Well
done.
We started a little bit earlier. We started a bit before you with that. It's one of those things that we just need to keep sharing it with the people, get it out there on your Facebook groups. We just want to get as many numbers as possible, and we will keep presenting this to the people that matter on the production side regarding our post-working hours and conditions, because there's really no reason that we in post should not have completely separate contracts and working hours to production. We don't work the way they do. We don't work on set. They go to locations. It's different. They have shorter schedules. They work for maybe a shorter period of time, 12 weeks, 3 months, a couple of months to get these films shot and made. And then we have 9, 10, 11, 12 months doing office work essentially. And that's the same during the shoot. So we're working hard to continue negotiating with PACT, who are the Producers Alliance over here. We've got, for those of you who don't know, we've already got a feature film agreement which protects and covers its members for films over $30 million over here, which is most of the premium stuff coming over from Hollywood. We've got TV drama agreements, which a lot of TV shows are now signing up for and using, which protects you for hours, overtime. You get a deal memo which tells you exactly what your rate should be and what your overtime rate should be and whether you can or can't have kit rental, and basically, removing the uncertainty of everything. They're not finished, they're works in progress. We're renegotiating as we go. And obviously long-term goal is we want to bring these hours down for post people so that a normal day is not 10+1 or 11+1. It's 8+1, maybe 9+1, moving down to 8+1, that kind of 8 to 9 hour day like a normal industry, and proving with the science that people who work less time actually are healthier and providing better work. Even if there's a couple more of them, you're catering for them with the money you save in the overtime. But it's a mental shift that we have to get here, because we all know post-producers, post-supervisors, they're human. They have a budget that they have to adhere to, and they have responsibilities to producers and to the production as well. So this is an organic moving game of chess where both sides need to understand each other. And I think that's the biggest problem here, is that it's been an us versus them mentality for such a long time that we've got generations of baggage that we have to break down before we can get to this, But the science is what it is. People who don't get sleep, get ill, get cancer, they die. People who do night shifts, there's a link between cancer and night work. And there's links between divorce and unhappiness and mental health and stress and breakdown for people working long hours who don't have a balance either as well. So I'm honest with you guys. I think this is going to take up my whole career, the rest of our lives, to continue, working this, because there's always going to be people on the other side of the table who want to look at you as a fly, to bring it back to the metaphor you brought in earlier from the 70s. And you're a cog, you're a thing to sit in front of a computer. But we got to keep the fight going, because if we don't, it will go back to the way it was before all of this started, and the way everything was in the 2000s and before. So that's kind of my spiel from BECTU. If you're not yet a member, please do join and think about joining. There's a special deal for £7.50 or £5 if you're unemployed. That's for the whole of the first year. And I think an important thing that not everyone knows is that what you pay as a BECTU member is dictated by your salary. So it's always a percentage of your salary. If it goes up, you call the membership department, it increases. If it goes down, you call the membership department, it decreases. Like, it's fair. Obviously, BECTU needs money to keep running, so we've got to pay them something, even though we'd love to have a union that works for free. And that's pretty much it from me. Eleanor, anything you want to drop in? Oh, and the rough assembly, obviously, you mentioned that earlier,
Yes.
didn't you? About, yeah.
I've just put the phone number for calling BECTU in the chat. And for anyone who is able to afford it, who is a newcomer or a runner or trainee, definitely join, because not only do you get the amazing resources that the Rough Assembly have been putting out, and I've now recently joined the committee because I've seen how hard they're working and how much they've achieved. And if you go onto the Rough Assembly website, you will see all of that. And it's really important to join the union, because we're all thinking that we've got long hours and we all individually want to make some change. And sometimes I think about a picture that always goes around whenever there's a government election or something, and it's this idea that there's loads of little faces and everyone's individually saying, oh, we can't make a difference. But then when you put all those little faces saying we can't make a difference together, and you get a big picture of 600, 1,000 people, you can see actually that there's strength in numbers, and that's what the Rough Assembly and the post-production synthesis branch is for. And definitely find out more about the Rough Assembly.
Yep. The best metaphor I had for all of this, ironically, is from A Bug's Life, where Kevin Spacey is playing Hopper. And do you remember that moment where he's talking to his grasshopper friends and he's like, those ants, if they knew they outnumbered us 6,000 to 1, then we'd be done for. It's only by keeping them apart that we stand a chance of controlling them. And I'm like, oh, we're the ants in A Bug's Life. We just all need to realize it and sort of share that, tell that to your friends. It's a funny little story and it makes people think differently. You know, it's going to take time, but if we all keep working together, we will get there. We will get there. Zack?
I've actually used that. I've used that exact clip in one of my blog articles.
Oh,
that
okay,
exact
great,
moment.
great.
So we are on the same page.
Yeah.
I said that this is how they see us, and we need to figure out how we can come together collectively, because this is the exact situation we're in. So yeah, great minds think alike.
Great. Thank you, Zack. Thanks for coming on and appreciate your time.
Yeah, you bet. This has been a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think we shared a lot of good info and hopefully there's been something new and interesting for everybody to dip into. 44 are still going. So thank you everyone for sticking around, and hope the links are useful. Come see us, come meet the committee on the next webinar. We're going to keep this stuff going a little bit longer, I think, until everyone gets back to work, and, you know, get into Zack's podcast, listen to his episodes and find some stuff that, you know, is really interesting to you, and let's all become better post people. Guys, thanks so much, everybody. Good to see you. Look forward to seeing you at the next BECTU Post Fest we do, or whatever the next networking event is. And Zack, hope to see you over the pond sometime.
Absolutely. This has been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity, and anybody that's listening, they want to reach out and find out more, just come find me on my website. I'm happy to help. That's why I'm here.
That's great. All right, people. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.